to hear the report from the First Selectman, Wendy Max-Studis, on the Board of Selectmen budget. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're going to begin with the First Selectman's presentation of the Board of Selectmen budget, and after that, we have a number of questions and policy discussions. And so, Wendy, welcome. And
Thank you.
Before you even begin, though, I do want to give a shout out to Simsbury Community Television. Thank you for filming this. We appreciate all that you do.
Okay, welcome. Tonight we're going to have a conversation on the Board of Selectmen budget. And you are free to ask questions. I'm going to go through the slides at my own pace, and stop me if you want to ask a question. I have a table of contents here, and I am a little nervous. I will just admit that. There's kind of a big crowd here. So,
we have our fangs ready for you.
okay, ready. Ready to go battle with you. This is our current board. Just everyone's familiar with. Amber is a deputy first selectman. We have Sean Ascom. Heather Gatz is new, Chris Peterson and Eric Wellman are on the board. And this is a letter to the Board of Finance, just some highlights. A couple things that I wanted to point out here is how much we thank our town staff for all the effort they've done in putting this budget together and working with us and answering endless questions. Maria, Amy, and Melissa, and everybody else that's in this room. And I also really want to thank the Board of Selectmen for a really collaborative effort that we went through for this budget. We had new people chiming in, Heather and Amber, and the guys from the past. Everybody contributed to the process. So you guys are welcome to read the little intro and enter. So Board of Selectmen priorities. We did have 2 priority and goal setting sessions. We still have not gone through those at this point. But a couple things I want to just highlight here is I feel that this budget really focuses on 2 things: keeping our residents and business community safe, and we're investing in improving valued town assets. So here we're going to cut to the chase and go through some of the big facts and points from this year's budget. We have come in with a flat mill rate, not counting the fire district, but I did hear that they were going to try to come in flat. We had 3.72% grant list growth. We also had $3.759 million in ARPA funding, and those things helped us keep the mill rate flat. The budget increase was 1.547, or about 6.39, but that's excluding operating transfers, cash for capital, and debt service. We took a cash for capital approach because next year we're looking at a huge spike in debt service, so we use cash for a lot of some of the capital projects. Another highlight that we have is we passed all the recommended service improvements with the addition of a police officer. We could talk about that a little later when we talk about service improvements. And then we used the ARPA funding on many existing CIP and CNR items that were already in the plan. And there's a couple new ones that we added that were Board of Selectmen goals. And the largest item in the CIP plan this year is the Simsbury Farms irrigation project for our valued asset, the course. Yes,
Sorry to
sure.
interrupt already. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
6.39, and I'm sorry, I got a whole bunch of stuff in emails yesterday and today, and I just didn't have the time blocked out to read all of that stuff, so I haven't had a chance to catch up on all of it. Maybe it's explained there, but
Okay.
what we got with time to read it was 4.15. So the budget that Maria gave us, it's gone up 2 percentage points.
Hold on, I'm trying to get back to. I'll let those guys. This is the budget that we came in with exclusive of those. I don't know if you guys want to address that.
So I'm just confused. I think you probably have a good answer.
Left replacement pages at your desk. So the
At my
replacement
desk.
page should be at your desk, but
Yeah,
shows the
I
board's
just
selected.
haven't had a chance to read this. I just got here.
True.
So do you want to explain it? 'Cause-
Well, I think Wendy's going to go
Oh.
into the differences in the budget, and there's also,
So, but it did actually go up 2 full percentage points, more than 2 percentage points?
yes.
And that was, our budget went up from yours because we did add, well, I'll show you the service improvements, but we did add four staff, I think 4 staff members.
And there's also, and there is the memo that just provides a summary of what the changes from managers
Yeah,
proposed to
I-
the Board of Selectmen. So that memo on your desk too will just help break that down. But Wendy will highlight those changes for you.
But just for the members of the public and our board, the budget expenditure increase is actually in the 22% range. And that's because some of those expenditures are being paid for with the revenue from ARPA, which is $3.5 million. So it's a non-taxpayer impacted expenditure increase. And I think Wendy's going to touch on most of those increases because it's a one-time revenue source are being funding one-time expenditures. So they won't be recurring in the budget, with the exception of a few that she's going to talk about.
Okay.
Maria, I have the replacement pages, but I don't have the memo you just mentioned.
Sorry, did we put that up printed for you? We can make copies of that for you.
That was the entry, the opening letter that you sent out for our budget, right? Highlighted the service
Right, and then we
agreements.
do the update for you. But if the hard copy isn't at your desk, please.
Is it?
Yes.
Yes, that's it.
Oh,
I didn't get that one.
I don't have it.
We don't have it.
you guys can look on with me.
Most of those I'll probably be going through up here, so,
So I'm sorry.
oh, that's okay.
I just thought maybe because you said about it doesn't include operating transfers, that maybe I was misunderstanding the 2% increase.
Yeah, I think it was just with the,
But it
Or
really is a
add.
2% increase.
okay.
So if you could just highlight the variances for us, the specific variances, Wendy, that would be helpful, because we don't have time to review that right now.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go through the service improvements, which add a lot to the increase. We are hiring an IT specialist. We're expanding our staff of 2 to 3. That will give Rick Bizzano more opportunity to do cybersecurity, to do more management level tasks, and to have somebody do more desktop web maintenance and other tasks that he has been doing, like helping me get into my email, things like that. The network engineering support is additional help. We kind of contract for the extra, for network support, so because it's a specialized thing. So there was a need for an increase here. I don't know if you wanted any more on that topic, but I'll go through the rest so we can come back to them if you'd like. The CALIA specialist, we currently have a police officer in that role. We are now going to hire a CALIA specialist to fill that role. That will free up a police officer.
Wendy, before, one of the things our board is trying to work on, and we forget all the time, is not to use acronyms. So can you let us know
Yes,
what CALIA
I
stands for?
will. I wrote it down. It's the Commission for Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies.
Thank you.
Okay. So this budget includes 2 police officers. And the construction inspection services is basically, I'm going to try to say this, Tom Roy, a contractor from the WPCA who has a civil engineering degree that's going to do work for your department.
Generally, yeah, we currently have an employee within WPCA. WPCA is paid with user fees. So to share that employee with a role in the town to oversee some of our construction that's done by our utility companies, we have to find a way to reimburse the WPCA for their time.
Then there's 2 smaller initiatives. A Pollinator Initiative supplies is we're continuing to do pollinator pathways throughout the town. That was a Board of Selectmen goal. So that's $7,500 to continue that. There's goals, there's a plan to do in between Iron Horse, so money will be working towards those initiatives. The $7,500 for the Simsbury Farms 50th anniversary is really a one-time expense for this year to help celebrate the farms and do events like they did last year, the movie nights, things like that, the community events that were a lot of fun for those of us that went to them. The professional development is really to extend the executive coaching from the department head level down to the division head level. And then the police service dog, which I'm sure we'll be talking quite a bit about, is this is the operating impact of the service dog. Basically, it's a stipend that is union negotiated for the officer that will take care of the dog, and it also includes vet fees and costs for the dog. And that would be an ongoing. That was a decision we made to put it in the operating budget to keep it because it's going to be there. So that, to me, is the big, a lot of the big impact on our budget is we have, if you can see, we have, 4 new staff members here, adding to Maria's town manager budget.
So just one quick question, the Pollinator Initiative, that's an annual expense, you're thinking that's gonna go in the budget every year
It is
forever?
an annual, Tom
It
can,
would be for a few years. I anticipate that number will go down once everything's established. But it does take some money to get the seed going, any, I guess, moving or cleaning out that we have to do, and shrubs. It's, they gotta come from somewhere, but it wouldn't be, past, I would say, what, 3 years, Brian? Yeah, maybe 3 years, and then kind of going away after, or going down to a smaller number after that. In addition to Iron Horse, it's also some of the parks or open spaces and the golf course where we'd be using the natural areas of the golf course that we're trying to do these pollinator pathways to keep that connection moving.
couple things that aren't on this slide I just wanted to note was we did not fund the ask for additional legal fees, but they aren't in the Board of Selectmen budget, so I just wanted to point that out. And we did not fund the outside agency request this year. We left them level funded, and the hope is that when we get to the ARPA project where we will be going out to 501c3s, that they can come in through that door to get the additional funding, so the levels stay flat and we're not increasing where they are today for next year. And then these are all the revenue assumptions from the town. We're using the collection rate of 98.5. The revenues remain strong due to the taxes and fees that we collect. Part of the accounting done here is takes the impact of the 29 mill rate change that is being proposed in the governor's budget. And based on that, we potentially will lose $203,000 in revenue. The grand list I mentioned is 3.72, so it's about 3.5 million in new revenue. And then the grand list, we've seen grand list growth over the last 3 years. I'm not sure what we're gonna see next year because it's a reval year next year. So I don't know if anybody has questions on this page.
Give us 1 second on this page.
Sure, I know,
There's a lot of stuff here.
I'm a one-page person, I like everything on one page, so.
So I guess this is for Maria. We don't know what the governor's gonna do. So we're gonna have to set the mill rate in May. How are we gonna do that without that information, or if it's passed after we pass our budget? And should we delay our referendum, or think about delaying it?
Yeah, so typically, we've been using the governor's proposed budget for the purposes of our budget process. And we also felt that in this particular circumstance, it's really probably the most conservative way to approach that revenue. And we did work into the calculation, again, that anticipated revenue loss of about $200,000 if that does go into effect. If ultimately the legislature doesn't approve that proposal, or maybe they even increase, the mill rate cap, maybe it's 35 instead of 29 or something of that nature, we would end up with a little bit of excess revenue that we hadn't anticipated.
So just from our perspective, we have to pass a mill rate. What if we pass a mill rate at 29 mills and then that changes? What would be the process that our board would have to go through to adjust the mill rate?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, we can generally go as far as, I would say maybe the first week of June before sending out tax bills and making sure they get out on time. So again, hopefully we would know by then what the legislature was going to do with that particular proposal.
Okay, we've been in this situation before, so we'll, but that may, just a heads up to our Registrar of Voters, it may not be when they want it. Are there any other questions from our board on what we see here?
Okay. And then this is just the chart on the grand list changes over the last 20 years, almost 20 years, I guess. I think we've seen this chart before. And then these are the cost drivers that were presented. Most of it is wage and step increases. We've had another minimum wage increase, and we have another one coming, I believe. And we're seeing the costs that everybody's seeing throughout the country, is the fuel costs. There are a lot of increases to software programs. I don't know why, but that's happening everywhere. Vehicles, we know that vehicle costs are on the rise, and then the same with supplies. And then the budget, we're also keeping the pension rate at 6.5, or moving it down to 6.5. Let's see, okay. And then this is just a comparison of last year's total operating, debt service, and cash for capital, which is a new item this year, to 2023's amounts.
Wendy, that is showing the ARPA expenditure in this chart?
It does. This one includes, the transfer, operating transfers, debt service, and cash for capital. So we come out at about 38 million. The Board of Ed is around 77 million. And the total is about 115 million overall for the full budget. Okay. And then this is just the breakdown through the budget book, all the subtotal expenditure lines, just to see where, the most expenditures are. And the tiniest one is the regional probate court. That's 12, okay. So now we're going to get into the fun stuff, is ARPA. We're $3.759 million now in our pockets, and $3.759 million coming most likely in June. So what we did was we're spending the first tranche of money now because we have it, and we used, well, I'll show you the plans that we used, but just so people understand how we got where we got, we started way back in June, I think, Amy? June, was it? Meeting. We started a work group. Sean's not here, but Sean started that work group, and we were operating under the interim final rule, which was pretty strict, pretty restrictive, that you had to follow what was in there. If we had a project, we didn't qualify, we did not get a pre-approval on the project that we were going to do. Amy would have had to vet every project to make sure that it would qualify, and then we would get the money back after we spent it if it met the need. So there was a lot of restrictions going on there. And at a point, we were looking for projects because we didn't even know what we would be able to get passed. We did not qualify for revenue loss. Our calculation did not meet the revenue loss. A lot of towns were taking this revenue loss, which meant they could bring in the funds and use it for general services. At that point, we did not qualify. And then the rule was you allocate the money by 2024, but you have to spend it by 2026. Then in January, surprise, the revenue loss was available to anybody up to $10 million. And since we had $7.5 million, it really created a whole new way of looking at ARPA. They also loosened a lot of the restrictions because they got a lot of feedback. The feds got a lot of feedback on what people needed. And the approach that I believe Amy's taking now is we're using the revenue loss because it doesn't require, it's easier to use, but we're still following the vein of ARPA funding, like what the reasons are: pandemic relief, input to your town, assets, things like that. So these are the projects that we have decided to support with the first tranche of money. I can go through each one. There's a section in the back that has a description for each one that I took from our capital section in our book, and I added a few of my own descriptions. But the first item on the list is the bridge design work. That was pulled from the full bridge redoing, which is a bonded item, but we moved it, and it was originally slated to use general funds, but we decided to use ARPA funds, especially because we heard from the public that this was something that they wanted to do, so we felt like, let's hear from the public and use the money for that.
Wendy, before you go
Sure.
on, just for members of the public who are watching, when we use the term general fund, that means money we're going to tax you for. So
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Pickleball courts, we heard from the public on the pickleball courts, and apparently it's in the Parks and Open Space Master Plan. It originally, I believe, was to replace the tennis courts there, but we decided to use pickleball courts. I had to say this word 100 times somewhere recently. And the asterisk means that it's new to this year's budget. So it was either in an out year or actually it was new altogether. It was
There's been a repair for those courts in the plan at some level for the last 3 years, I believe. Last year, fiscal year '22, I added rebuild those courts in an out year. This is moving it up.
Okay, thank you. The Tarafield Park Pavilion replacement, we look at that as another investment in Tarafield Park, and it's on the CNR. The backstop for Tarafield, we had the WETOG backstop in the plan. These are also under CNR later, but we were going to do the WETOG backstop. We decided to move the Tarafield softball backstop up because we are doing the WETOG one at the same time, and we're also doing all these improvements to Tarafield Park, so why not do the big shebang all at once? The Curtis to Tarafield Survey Trail, so we have the Route 10 to Curtis Park project under potentially funded. It's in the CIP, I believe. And we have the Bloomfield to Tarafield making headway with the East Coast Greenway. So we found that there are some trails out there that exist. And we are going to have, Tom's going to try to survey that property and see what is ours, what we can do there to make this happen. So I don't know if you want to weigh anything in.
Yeah, the first step in making the connection between Curtis and Fairfield proper is to get a detailed professional survey so that we know the slopes and the grades, we know what property the town owns, who owns the other properties. We can then come up with potential trail alignments, and that gives us the ability to now have an intelligent conversation with any groups that are either in support or opposed to this, so we know long-term what the project's going to look like.
And this was actually an ad by our board to put this on. It was a priority when we had our goal-setting session. So it doesn't exist really on any of our plans right now. And then the good old dredging of Town Forest Pond. That was an open space master plan. It's on the CNR, and it's for environmental reasons that if somebody wants to know what those are, they can ask.
Andy, I'm just going to interrupt one more
Sure.
thing. CNR for the public means capital non-recurring. Those are projects less than $250,000 that we try not to bond for. They happen periodically, not every year. So we call that capital non-recurring because they don't happen every year, and they're things generally under $250 that we don't bond for.
Thank you, Lisa, for explaining that for me. The other thing with dredging Town Forest Pond that we also talked about is, that's an asset in town that potentially could be a spot for people to go, if it's healthier. So that also weighed in on why we would want to do that. The next item is really a Board of Ed capital item. I believe it's mostly the high school air conditioning on at least the third floor. And one of the main uses with ARPA that a lot of those towns are using is using it for HVAC. It's in the interim rule, it was a given, and it still is pretty much a given. So these three items are all HVAC related, and also the library variable air control units were on the town facilities master plan, and those are new because the town facilities master plan was recently completed, so some of those items got moved into the CNR. And then the Simsbury Farms playground was due to inflation cost increase, as Tom's been talking, a lot of these things are going up. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
The voters approved $200,000 for the playground last year, playground replacement. We started getting, bringing the vendors to get the final designs done, and due to COVID and supply lines and materials, seeing about 30 to 35% increases across the board on those type of supplies and installation, hence the $75,000 ask here.
Okay, and now we're going to get to my favorite item in the list. Not the most expensive, but one of the favorites is the police service dog. This idea came around back in August. I saw an article in the Current. I said, Amy, can we use ARPA funds for this? And Amy said, I already was talking to the chief about this, and it kind of gained some momentum. There are a lot of communities. All you need to do is get on Google police therapy service dog, and you will see multiple articles within Connecticut and across the country of police departments that are getting a service dog for their community. I do have it in the back, the uses, the need, but I will speak to those. It's goodwill, it's mental health, it's community involvement, it's to relate to our police department, it's to help our officers, it's ARPA funded, so there's really, the only money that we're using is not taxable, no one's paying taxes on the dog. And
This dog.
Pardon me?
this dog, which we will have hopefully if all of this goes through for a period of time, but down the road, 10 years from now, somewhere down the road.
Yes, I'm just going to do this right here.
$10,000 a year.
This is not my laptop,
Plus
but,
$10,000. My goodness.
so,
That's just fair. You're not playing fair.
I want the dog. So I put in here, expected life is hopefully many years. And we want to enlist a police service dog for community PD. And as you can read the project, I can't actually read it, but I can read it here. You know, it was the idea for the ARPA funding. And originally it came when the funding was strict, and we knew that we could use it. But again, look at that little dog there, okay?
So Wendy and the chief, if you could just clarify for the public, this is not an attack dog. It's not used to catch people who are going away. It's not a drug sniffing dog. Can you just clarify that for the public? And it's not going to be a German Shepherd.
It's not, no. So we have gone through the whole process and we have been approved for a dog. And one of those dogs is either a black lab, a brown or a chocolate lab or a yellow lab. So that's the type of dog that it's going to be. It does zero tracking. It does zero sort of patrol work like you would think of a traditional police dog. It doesn't search for drugs. It doesn't search for bombs. It is strictly a service, therapy, comfort, facility dog. It's all wrapped up into one. In fact, we were with 3 of them today at a training, and just the attention that these dogs draw, even among police officers who see these dogs on a regular basis, is just unbelievable. So our vision is to have this dog when we visit the library for all sorts of events and all different age groups, for any of our adult housing areas in town, for our schools, to bring people in, and it just immediately breaks down those barriers. It's going to be great for our greenway. It does provide another service, that actual comfort aspect of this. So if there is a crisis in town, which we do have on occasions, that dog can be called in, and for some people, for a lot of people, there's just an automatic sort of relaxation that comes with having a dog that is very calm at your side, that you can pet. It's there for you. It also is proven to be beneficial in-house here for the police department members who honestly go through a lot of stress every single day, and that piles up over years, and as well as other town employees. So it would be a dog for the community. Just to clarify one thing, that $70,000 is not for the dog. The dog is actually given to us at no cost to us. And so we've been working on the idea of a dog and what type of dog, meaning what type of service, for several years now, tracking our need for a traditional police-style dog, a patrol dog, a force multiplier dog, and we have not found the need for that. This idea came up about 1.5 years ago, and we were looking into it, and we had our community services officer go and visit all the places that do have a dog. Yukon has a couple dogs, Groton, Naugatuck, Middletown, and there's slight variations on all these, and we have now gone through the process, and since last August, talking about really the potential of having this and how this would work for us.
Some people are going to question the vehicle for the dog, and it's not actually a vehicle for the dog. It's a regular cruiser that has a small amount added for dog protection. Can you break that down for us, what that cost?
Yeah, absolutely.
Details?
So it is, from the outside, besides maybe a sticker on there with the dog's name or a dog's face on there, it will be an identical vehicle to a regular cruiser that you see. With all the lights, the sirens, it's a police interceptor, so it's pursuit rated. The only difference inside it, instead of having a single cell compartment area to safely secure a human, it will have a kennel instead. The advantage of going with a new vehicle for this is for several reasons. One is, right now for the position that is assigned to where we're going to put this dog, our community services officer, they get vehicles that have been used on patrol already. And so they get ones that have 50,000 miles, 60,000 miles, because they don't do the significant miles and the running of the car like a patrol officer does. So every couple of years, they get basically a hand-me-down. Well, what we have found over predominantly the last 11 years with the Explorers you didn't see it so much with the Crown Victorias. Ford changes often, just small little parts, and you have to buy all new parts for inside. So if we were to put this kennel system in a hand-me-down 2017 Explorer this year, when it's time for a new cruiser for that dog handler in a year or in 2 years, that kennel may not fit in that car. So because of the change of the design. So that's one reason. We also expect to have this vehicle, unlike all the other vehicles, for the life of the dog. So we're estimating, even though it's up there as for as long as forever, or whatever the phrases you have there, the real expected work life of this dog is about 8 to 10 years, which is much longer than a patrol working dog. So this vehicle assigned to an officer who does not normally patrol and have 30,000 miles on the vehicle, the equivalent of 120,000 miles in engine running time on a vehicle, we believe we can make this vehicle last. But if for some reason things don't work out, that vehicle is or can be used just as any other vehicle can be. It's, again, a police patrol rated vehicle with all the safety, emergency lights, all the regular stuff that you would find in a patrol car.
So Chief, can I ask the chief a question? So Jamie is potentially the officer that will
Yes.
take it. So
Yep.
he's using a vehicle now that will be he'll have a new vehicle to use.
He will.
So potentially we could have another vehicle, and with the new police officers may preclude the need to purchase another car in the future.
I didn't quite follow that, but the car that Jamie has right now.
Did anybody? Yeah, thank you.
The car that Jamie has right now is ready to.
For someone else to use.
No, it's ready to be retired.
Oh, to be retired.
Yes,
I
yeah,
see.
because it's already been handed down to him
Okay.
after several years on the road. But I think I understand what you're saying is there would not have to be a recycle to him as soon as.
Maybe that's what I was saying, but I think the law
I think
should
one of the things that we were thinking about, three new patrol officers patrolling and no new requests for police cruisers. We were wondering how you were able to do that, and we thought that
maybe this was an extra vehicle.
No. So no new additional besides, we did ask for three cruisers. So what we found within the last year or two, there has been a rapid increase or a huge increase in the amount of private duty jobs. With all this growth in town, we have had a lot of private duty jobs that we have not been able to fill. Ones that we have been able to fill, sometimes we run out of cruisers. So what we have done is our private duty cruiser that we had special for that did not have the normal patrol equipment in it because it had been used on patrol, the mileage got up there, and then it was moved to this patrol or this private duty vehicle, which by its very nature is just to be out there and to let people know that there's a construction site here, to help in protecting the people who are working on the street, in the hole, with a tree, whatever it may be. So they're not equipped for the regular patrol function, but we only had one of those. So instead of selling back one of our cruisers that had already met its life in the patrol function, we have kept one of those. So now we're able to keep another cruiser that doesn't have all the equipment in it that's needed for the patrol function, but now we have two out there for the actual private duty need that we have, and we foresee, the need in the next few years with the amount of growth that is happening. That same idea is going to be happening with a patrol car. And it was already in the plan this year just to retain one. So instead of selling one back for anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 depending on the market, we're retaining that vehicle in our patrol fleet. So that's one of the reasons why we wouldn't need an additional vehicle, but also, because that stretches out the life of all the vehicles. But also, we have 39 officers right now, we don't have 39 vehicles. We don't need a one vehicle to one person. The officers are assigned vehicles on the patrol shift. So say car 16, it's just labeled 16. Some person who works A squad has 16, B squad has 16, and C squad. So they get rotated through, and they're oftentimes running almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But there's no need at this point, an additional 3 officers, an additional 6 officers, for us to purchase more patrol vehicles outside of our normal 3 vehicle request.
that'll be the same for the next 5 years. We're not going to see 2 years from now a request for more than 3 a year, right?
Correct. So right now, we've had a little bit of an issue getting cars.
Yeah.
And the Tahoes that were approved 2 years ago still have not come in yet. So sometimes there's some really strange waves in when we're able to replace vehicles, and it just so happens to be that we've been in a very good place with those. They do often need to get, moved along for some work, and when we rotate a vehicle out, get a new one in, now we have a vehicle down for a while. But to answer your question, we will not be seeing an increase in those 3 normal ones per year.
Thank you. A lot of vehicles, police vehicles. So now we're going to move on to, so those are the capital items. You'll see them again in the capital non-recurring and the capital improvement plan sheets. But this is, so we have a couple requests. I did include the Board of Ed on here as it was an ARPA request. They asked for 2 because of, so these are more pandemic related items, health, mental health. We've seen that impacting youth throughout the country. We've seen that impacting adults throughout the country. And this is also one of the primary uses of the ARPA funding. So the Board of Ed and our Social Services Department came to us asking both for 2 social workers for 4 years. And what the board decided was to do it as a pilot for 2 years because we don't know if we're going to recover in 2 years and may not need that in 2 years or 4 years. We're hoping in 2 years everybody's back to normal. So the way we funded it was it's coming out of operating. $450 is for the Board of Ed, and we are doing 1 social worker for social services. There was a request for a police kind of community social worker, but after we met with Kristen and she met with a few of us, it appeared that the Youth Services Bureau, and if you want Kristen to weigh in this, that was where the greatest need was. We did talk about sharing with the high school. That was a way it was presented, but when we talked to Kristen, it was presented that they don't really do the same function as the social services social workers would do, who are there all the time, not, during the summer, there's no social workers at the school or from, 9 to 5 after that. So we decided to fund 1 social worker for 2 years. Now, of course, if you read the little note there, this is 2 years. We plan to do a needs assessment that came up. How are we going to prove what the need is or evaluate that? And then the big question that everybody's asking is, how do we avoid the cliff at 2 years? Because if none of us are here in 2 years, we'll have a social worker. So those are all things. You guys can ask them questions on that if you want, because we have all the experts here to answer those questions.
Open it up to the board. Linda?
Yeah, I just would ask, when you hire someone, will you make it clear that this is a 2-year position?
Yeah, we had discussed in the posting that we'd probably phrase it something to the effect of interim. That's typically how we would do something that's, again, more interim in nature.
So
is
they'll
just
know
be
in
honest
advance.
about that.
So would they be unionized or not?
Possibly. So we technically do not have this exact classification. It does not exist. We do have a community social worker classification. It's a bit of a different position. That particular position is represented by a bargaining group. Typically what will happen is if we do have a new full-time position, if the union is interested in the petition, there is a process where they can ask for that position to be recognized. So it is possible that it could become a bargaining unit position. If the union goes through that process, they're allowed to do under MIRA.
Do they typically contemplate short-term or sunset provisions on contracts or on positions?
No, it kind of varies. Well, I shouldn't say it varies by bargaining group. If a union was to petition for this position, I suspect it would be our CSCA group, and they have taken a position even on temporary positions that they want to, absorb the position oftentimes. So I think it's possible that we could get a request for them to again petition for this position.
And have you looked at contracting work as opposed to hiring?
Yeah, it's something that we had discussed. I think in the current market, it could be difficult to try and contract with an agency for that work. I don't know, Kristen, if you want to elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, I think that it would be really difficult to find somebody to do this contractually. Just as an example, we do have contracted therapists that we work with through our youth therapy program, and it's gotten to be incredibly impossible to find someone to refer folks to. And just as an example, this week alone, I have 4 new referrals from the schools to find therapists for these kiddos, and I have nowhere to send them.
Maria, If it ends up being a union position and they opt for a pension and then the position goes away in 2 years, what happens? How is that handled?
Sure. So as you might recall, we are currently in arbitration proceedings with CSCA regarding the pension, and we did propose to close the DB plan. We have not yet been notified of what the decision is in that award, but based on the current circumstances, employees in that bargaining group have an option between the DC plan or the DB plan. We are finding that about 70% of the employees in that group are selecting the DC plan for our new hires. And for the DC plan, in order to be fully vested for the employer contribution, somebody would have to be here for 5 years. And for our DB plan, you would have to be here for 5 years to be vested. So with the DB plan, the employer contribution just stays with the plan, and then the employee is able to take a full refund of their contributions.
And then, so I did put this up there, it's really not part of the budget, but it's kind of potentially coming. We have some agency requests that we're working on that would come most likely as a supplemental appropriation because the money would be needed before the budget goes into play. Maria's talked to the Farmington Valley Health District. We've talked with Sarah Nielsen from the Main Street Partnership about some programs. The 501c3 program came out of the original ARPA work group. And Amber, who is the liaison to housing, has presented the need for housing authority. One other note on this that just I don't want to get past is we no longer have an ARPA work group. We now have the finance subcommittee, which has taken on the task for ARPA. And we're hoping that in the next couple of weeks, we'll look at these projects and make some determinations on any changes to them and get those rolling out. And then basically at this point, we'll have used pretty much almost to the penny, I don't know, Amy, all of the first tranche of money.
So just for members of the public, we're entering an unusual time in the town's history. Most of the time we make our appropriations as a town through the annual budget. An appropriation is a legal action and a civic action taken by citizens and elected officials. It actually doesn't involve staff other than they give us recommendations and they help us develop our budgets. And then once the appropriation is given, staff then has the legal authority to act. In Simsbury, primary way is through the annual budget, but the charter does permit supplemental appropriations, and we try not to use them because in those situations the voters don't get to vote. During a supplemental appropriation, the Board of Selectmen must recommend the appropriation, and then the Board of Finance must approve it. So it's a two-board approval to do that, but it does not involve citizens unless it's a very large amount. So we generally try not to do that, but because of ARPA is so unusual, we will see more supplemental appropriations than ever in our town's history. And with the cost overrides because of the current economic condition of the town, we will see more supplemental appropriations than we've ever seen in our town's history. And I did want to let the public know that. And that as the Board of Finance, we generally don't do public audience, but when there is a request for a supplemental appropriation, we will be offering a public hearing because the citizens do have a right to weigh in on that. So just want to give people a heads up. It is going to be an extraordinary time, and we will see more of those.
Okay. One other thing I'd like to...
Just one thing to point out from the peanut gallery here. This is Sean.
Oh, I didn't know it was here.
A disembodied voice.
Sean, can you just wait a second, and I'll recognize you in a sec?
We didn't
One sec. We didn't even know you were on there. Does any member of the board want to comment on that before I go to Sean? Okay, Sean.
Go for it, Sean.
I respectfully disagree that we're going to do an unprecedented number of supplemental appropriations here, and that we do them in the fall as we did recently, and there was I think 8 or 10 of them. We do them as part of closeout. So I don't expect there to be hundreds here. There's going to be a consistent number, probably in the 5 to 10, 15 range. There's not going to be dozens of these things, I don't believe.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. Yes, we do generally do closeouts of appropriations. Those are reappropriations of money the public has already approved, not an increase in the expenditure. But these will actually be an increase in expenditure, but covered by a grant. So we do, I anticipate seeing.
The public is not paying for them, I guess is my point, or they've already paid for them. So it's not unprecedented is my only point.
Yeah, that's correct, but it is an unusual, and we're seeing more towns do supplemental appropriations. If you read in the press, that's getting a lot of press, and I did want to let folks know what the process is and how we're going to approach it from our board, and we will be offering public hearing when there isn't a supplemental. Go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you. Hi, Sean. I know you were there. One thing that I wanted to point out was, as we consider this, we basically have $3.7 million that we could potentially do the same thing next year, looking at our capital plans. So, you know, unless there's some unprecedented need that comes up before then or something like that, that's something that our board should consider, I think. So, just mention that there. Now we're getting into the capital, and I'm going to defer a lot of these over to the experts. This list is off of the CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan, and it's items, well, that should be over, maybe over $250,000. And I sorted them in order so that, well, no, I didn't actually. I did the Parks and Rec and the Public Works by group, and those should be in order. And I'm going to turn questions over on these to Tom and Tom. Asterisks mean it's a new add to that plan in the document. So if anybody has questions on this list, please ask the experts.
So I just have a process question. Do you want to go through these now, or I know you had talked about kind of going tab by tab. So do you want to do it when we do get to capital tab?
So why don't we go tab by tab, because we do have replacement pages, and then as we go through the tab, staff can let us know what has changed in the replacement page from what's in our books, and we can go through them tab by tab. I mean, just a general thing, I had talked with Maria about some of the projects lists, like for instance, pavement of roads, tar, low, SIP bond, and general fund, but it's not clear always how much for each in the spreadsheet, although it is in each individual sheet. So as we figure out how to do spreadsheets in the future, we'll try and clarify some of that. And I also want to thank you, Wendy, for adding a lot of references to the master plans. That's something our board is always interested in. We funded all these master plans. It's nice to see that they're being used.
One other thing I would like to point out, that all the acronyms that are there are in the appendix, in Appendix A, and you can look up what they mean. Okay, so you want to keep going here?
Yeah.
Okay, so these are CNR fund projects. So the first list is Public Works. That's a screenshot from our test giveaway. These projects total $922, and again, the asterisks are newly inserted in the CNR most of them due to the town facilities master plan. And questions can be directed to Mr. Roy. Here's the Culture, Parks, and Rec CNR items. And again, the ARPA projects are here because they are also shown in the budget in this section. And they have a total of 679. And then the police includes the recurring cruisers. Oh, the staffing study, I just want to mention that. That's new. So that was originally when, we proposed the new officers. We wanted to really take a look at the police department to see what our staffing needs were, because we didn't match the commission's request for 6 officers, but we wanted to make sure, where we stood. So we are going to do this study, and I didn't weigh in on this, but a lot of the reasons we did fund the additional officer was because they made a good case for 6 officers, which was not really going to happen this year. But with the staffing study, we felt that we wanted to kind of hedge our bets if the staffing study came back and said, yes, you did need 6 or 10 officers. And so that was part of the reason why we did that. I was gonna add one more thing on that, which I kind of just lost my train of thought about adding the police officers. But that was one of the reasons, why we decided to fund that officer. And then the service dog is in the list also, and then the rest of the other PD. Yes, I was. Thank you, Heather. She read my mind. So that was part of the whole argument that we made too amongst ourselves, was we had 5 potential retirements or 6 potential retirements coming up next year. And so rather than be way understaffed, if everyone took retirement, we felt like this would just hedge the bets there. So that was part of the rationale there. Thank you. And then the library computer replacements for the public use. These are the items for the general fund. General government includes the reval, again, some software upgrades, which are costing a lot of money, and then the CNR fund for sewer. Those are coming out of the Sewer Use Fund, SUF is what it stands for. And then here's the famous debt service chart that's hard to understand for anybody that's normal, but the scary parts are, sorry. The scary parts are the yellow is the 8% target line, which is the policy. We are not supposed to go over that. We were at 7%, so you can see between the pink and the yellow, the danger zone, which is where we're headed, which is why next year and the year after, are going to be tough years for us budget-wise.
So just looking at that chart, and I think people who know me know I'm sort of challenged with color, but I think that that's green. Is that green?
Which one?
Above the dark color?
Oh, that's blue. The top line?
You're talking about a line?
No, go down, go down, go down. Yep. What color is that?
That's
Yeah.
Olive.
green.
Okay. Well, that color is the year, Amy, is this correct? This is this year. What we're approving this year gets bonded? So,
Well, it's the fiscal year 23 issuance, so it's projects from fiscal year 22 and 23, since we bond every other year.
so will we see some of the projects were approved this year in the pink? Magenta? No,
The
okay.
pink is just the Latimer Lane issuance.
So will we see the projects we approved this year in any of the other colors? No. Okay, so what we approved this year is that olive color. So those are the things that don't have to be. Those are, you think of the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. But when we approve a capital project this year, you paid for it in debt service in future years. So it's kind of a weird system we have. Obviously this year, we're doing okay, and actually debt service is below what it was last year. But we're going to, once we get to the budget modeling, we'll talk about this spike and what's coming and how we're going to plan for it.
Okay. So next steps, I'm just going to go through these. We have the public hearing on the 6th, I believe. The 5th. I've changed it to the 6th. That was my bad. Where did I get the 6th from? Sorry about that. I changed things incorrectly. Okay, the 5th. And then it'll go to referendum. I wanted to note that the American Rescue Plan second money is coming in June, and that we're all going to be facing probably a tough budget season next year. And then there's the abbreviations. And I do just want to point out, here's all the projects, if you want to look. And again, I'm going back to the dog. So, okay, so that's the presentation. Questions?
First of all, thank you. That was really, actually very exciting. Very well done. Much appreciated. And thanks to the Board of Selectmen and town staff for all your work in putting this together. We appreciate all the efforts. Bert and I had the chance to sit through the budget workshop, and we had a grand time. Thanks to Tom Roy, who gave us our own table so that we could not only eat lunch, but put our heavy books down. We appreciate that, and it was lots of fun. Do people have any questions? Immediately, we're going to go through it in more detail, and obviously Wendy and staff and her board can answer questions. But before we do that, I ask Amy to pull up the budget modeling sheet, sort of where we are, because a lot of our questions we're going to be asking are not necessarily focused on this year, but on the out years and how we're thinking and how we're going to plan for it.
Do you want to take?
Yeah.
All right.
Take it out. Wendy. Yeah. And Wendy made reference to something called a debt service spike. When we approve capital, and I'll say it again for the public, that is bonded, the debt service, which is like the car payment on the loan, comes a couple years, 1 or 2 years later. So you don't feel the pain of your decision until later. It's
Where's the dog?
Melissa's son.
Yeah, I think this is what she's gonna show. I printed this out from tab 2. But this is she sent us this today, or yesterday, but it's showing the 442 increase. I mean, I printed this out this morning, so we got this yesterday.
I confess it. Is that more information that we didn't get?
Yeah, this is
They added
that
ARPA revenue, I think.
the thing that Amy sent.
That's what that is.
Either yesterday or
it's in
it came out as a
yeah.
spreadsheet, and I don't know how to print out spreadsheets. So I could bring a laptop next time.
Let's see, I think I have a special folder.
So I mean, this is the one that's supposed to show the modeling,
With what? I don't know.
but
Should we
I
take a
noticed
brief
that
recess?
it's based on the.
Amy, do you need a recess?
It's just not acceptable. I mean,
Okay, guys, we're going to go ahead and take about a 5 to 10 minute recess while we get our computer systems fixed. All right, we're going to go ahead and reconvene the meeting, and we'll begin. Thanks, everyone. Okay, we're going to start with our budget modeling. We had asked Amy Merriweather, we've been working with our board for, I think, 2 years, trying to put together a model so that we can sort of project what's coming and then better plan for what's coming. And a couple of things we wanted to bring to folks' attention is first, why don't we show where we are given the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education budgets as presented. So if you could bring us down and we'll sort of show what the levy looks like. So you'll see here we had Amy put together the mill rate, the fire mill rate. If you could go up on the left and show folks where we are. The mill rate, 37.41 plus 122 plus 38.63. That's for fiscal year 23, which is the year we're doing. To the left is the previous year. So you'll see it's a flat mill rate. And so what does that mean? We took the median income home value is $322,000 based on Circ Profile's latest town data. So we upped it to $350 because the home values are going so high right now. So we said, okay, what is the impact on a $350,000 home, a $450,000 home, and a $550,000 home? And then new this year, we said, well, wait a minute, we don't just pay taxes on the home, we also pay it on a vehicle. So we asked Amy to do a vehicle impact and two variations. One, if they cap the mill at 22 mills, and one if they don't. And the reason why that's significant is because if they cap the mill at 29 mills, we will get reimbursed by the town, by the state for that lost revenue. And what that means to our taxpayers is about $200 on average savings in taxes on your car taxes. So it is a good deal for our citizens, even though we're being shorted a little bit. We're not getting the full reimbursement of the full revenue. It still works out for our residents to be a net positive. So there is a potential that they will be paying less taxes this year. If the mill rate cap doesn't pass, then the taxes are flat. So you can sort of see how that works. But then, as we go on to next year, and we start to project, okay, taxes were flat, hooray, congratulations, you did a great job. Let's go to column G. And you sort of see what happens there. Whoa, what's going on? Taxes are going to increase $672, $864, $1,056. Oh my goodness, what's going on there? And then after that, you get some spikes and dips, but for the most part, it does okay. So why is that happening? And that's because of the debt service spike. So Amy, if you could show us on the expenditures what happens to debt service over the next 5 years.
breakdown of where we were for the budget for fiscal year '22, and then we have our fiscal year '23 based on what we know, which is current debt. And then in these out years, it's all the projects that haven't been approved yet, or that have been approved and have not been bonded for. So these are truly estimates, and you'll see your big spike here in fiscal year '24 of about 8.1 million is majority related to the Latimer Lane project that was approved last year. So we're going to have our first issuance for the Latimer Lane project in fiscal year '23, and then the debt impact is going to hit in fiscal year '24.
And you can see that increase in interest is $1.7 million increase. We had a decrease this year. It's going to spike to $1.7 million.
And is the Latimer Lane number that you used based on what was previously estimated, or recognizing that construction's now like 25%?
So the Latimer Lane estimate that's in here is what was approved at referendum.
Right, so it'll be even more than that.
It could be. So they're actually going back and forth with the owner's rep and Tecton, their architects right now. And you heard that there could be a potential increase. The initial estimates of that increase have come down. So they are going back and forth to see if they can A, get that down even more, and B, what that looks like as far as going out to bid. Because even if those estimates are high, they're still just estimates. We need the bids to come back to see what our true impact is.
So I did speak, just doing a side, I did speak with Maria before this, and she had mentioned, obviously, to the extent if we need to go out to referendum again, we would try and time it at Derek's suggestion with the November referendum if we can't get it done in April, so that it's timed when citizens are actually voting. But there are lots of choices and decisions that will have to be made by the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen before it gets to us, because capital has to come to us upon their recommendation. So, but we do anticipate that rearing its head, and that will be part of our discussions in the long term. But so you see a 1.7 million increase in debt service. So how are we dealing with that in this current budget? So I know everyone in this room has heard it at the Board of Selectmen presentation, but for members of the public who may be new to this conversation, one of the things we did this year is there was capacity in our budget because of grand list growth. And we could have done, hooray, tax holiday, dip in taxes. But we said, wait a minute, we have these needs in the out years that we can take care of in this year and keep taxes flat. So that will save us in the long term. We can pay cash for some stuff as opposed to bonding, and we can do that this year. So there's about $1 million in our budget that we are spending that will take care of needs and also help deal with the spike. So we have that $1 million, and they're covering one-time expenses. It's a new line item called cash for capital. And next year, when that spike happens, what happens to that line item? It gets zeroed out. So that will help change the spike from 1.7 to 700,000. So Amy has in the budget, in her expenditure budget, she has the 1 million still there. So Amy, can you show us what it looks like if you zero that line out?
So you can see it's a mill rate decrease. It goes from 37.41 down to 36.97.
If we take out $1 million? This year? No, I meant for the next year. No, we're going to keep it in for this year. So that's one way we can get the taxes down a little bit. We've gone from 600 to 572. So that's one thing for probably department heads to know, that that's likely going to be wiped out. Does that mean you can't do capital? No, because we have something called capital reserve, which is where we've taxed for people and we put it aside for a rainy day, and next year it's going to be raining. So we will be tapping the reserve as opposed to current taxes. But that's one of the tools we're going to be utilizing. But just to give folks an idea of sort of what's coming and when it's coming and why we're doing what we're doing. That is a planned use of capacity in the current budget to take care of current needs in the out years that will help serve as a ballast for the promises we made on the debt to fund Latimer Lane that we are legally required to pay. So that's one step we're going to take. But you can see it's going to be a challenge for the next few years. And if you look at where we are, the prior 10 years before this, up to this point, you're basically paying the same amount of taxes as you were then. There were some spikes and dips, but we've done a great job keeping taxes flat. We are not going to be able to do that, or it's going to be a challenge for us to do that going forward. And so we'll be talking with the public, and that's why public hearing is so important. But I did want to raise that, and that's sort of the context as we go forward. Before we get into the line item, a couple of things that Amy mentioned. Latimer Lane is showing an override right now. We think it's in a little over $3 million. The options there are going to be, you can either cut back what you plan to do. There is some ARPA money. There's something called capital reserve. We could do a supplemental appropriation. We can go out to referendum. But all those will involve community input and a high degree of communication, because it's already a $30 million project. So watch for that and just keep that in your head as we go through the budget. There's one other thing that came up. The other thing I wanted to bring to the attention of this board is right now we are anticipating, at our last meeting, we heard from the Board of Education that they are facing a potential deficit in their budget. Oftentimes at the end of the year, you take excess revenues or savings from expenditures, and those go into capital reserves. This year, they're looking at about a $500,000 challenge. They're going to try and get that lower, and they're working to do that, but that will then mean about 500 less of a tool that we have in the future years. So we're monitoring that. I know they're being very meticulous about watching that. I don't know if you have any more updates on that. No. So one of the questions we get asked as a board all the time, why do you budget a 98.5% tax collection rate? And it's precisely for scenarios like this. So we do plan for that, but it means that there may not be the capacity where you normally, if you have excess savings, you would put it towards pension or capital reserve, or any of the funds are low in deficit. So the good news, however, and I think as we start going into the budgets, why don't we start with the revenue tab? Are folks ready to move on to the budget books? Yep. So if we start with the revenue tabs, Amy, can you speak to projected year-end excess revenues? We're looking at about 2 million excess revenues, we think.
Tab number here.
Or
Two.
I got 1.6 million in excess revenues, tab 2. Oh, I don't know.
It's tab 2.
Okay. Part of that is from the tax collection assumption rate. Some of the other reasons we got this at our quarterly meeting. There was some savings in there.
So what was your question?
Okay, just showing, we're got a year-end projection of about 1.6 million in excess revenues. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's about that thus far. We had some additional grants that were coming in from the state. Our conveyance fees for our town clerk's office are coming in above anticipated revenues. We had, what was the other one? Sorry, it would be easier if I had my quarterly notes.
Well, there's some savings in town clerk. Building, we came in not as budgeted.
No. It was mainly the conveyance taxes, and then I think that there was some additional funding for some state revenue that was anticipated in the state budget that we didn't account for in the budget. And then there was the education, the ECS came in well over budget as well. I think those were the main drivers.
Okay. So there also was a surplus more than budgeted in general liability and insurance?
Yes, so that is our...
is that KERMA?
Yes, it's that KERMA contribution that we get for a good full year. I forget what it's called offhand, but yes, that's what it is.
And so I have a question about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what you've budgeted for fiscal '23 is an expectation of a refund of $27,000, but in the last 2 years, you've gotten refunds of $113,000 and $88,000. I don't know what the 5-year look back looks like, but it seems like maybe we should expect more than just 27,000. Is there an opportunity to book a little more revenue here?
Yeah, and we'll go back because I don't believe the 113 is just the contribution they make to us. So they look at a number of factors, and it's not a guarantee. It's a program they started, I believe, a little less than 10 years ago. They take a look at the overall health of the pool and how well it performed, as well as us as members in terms of our claims experience. And then they do a calculation on their end. And if funds permit, they will give us sort of almost like a bonus check or a reimbursement check at the end of the fiscal year. And again, that amount's not guaranteed, so we do tend to budget conservatively. But I don't believe that the 113 is just the reimbursement. I can look that up and tell you what that number was. That may include other insurance refunds. I don't have an answer. Things of that nature, like if, what would be an example? Somebody hits a guardrail, and we got a check from an insurance company. So there are other items in that, but I can look it up and see what we actually received for this most recent year. I think it was more in the neighborhood of 50,000 this year, but I can confirm.
Well, but all in, across all these different Kerma plus other things, I mean, my point is only, and I don't expect you to answer instantly, but if we have a track record of getting, $80,000, $100,000 every year for the last 5 years, maybe we ought to budget revenue of greater than 27,000. It just gives you a little extra there.
If we could,
but I don't know what the 5-year look back. So that's something you can talk to us about tomorrow.
Definitely. I can take a look at that. I just, I think I'm hesitant to be less than conservative. We've made a couple changes over the years where we increased our revenue projections and then they didn't happen. So the investment income changed and then the pandemic hit and we took a huge loss there. We changed the building permits last year. We're not going to hit it this year. We decreased the police overtime last year. We're going to be over this year. So I'm just a little hesitant. I'd rather stay on the conservative side personally, but I can get you the data and you can help make the decision tomorrow.
Yeah, so one of the things I think we struggle with as a policy board is we do take a very conservative revenue tax collection assumption rate, and because we do that, we do have some flexibility to be slightly less conservative, although still very reasonable in other line items. That's the ballast that we have, and it enables us to handle irregular revenues, and we do have a lot of irregular revenues, so we'll follow up.
Nobody expects you to have a crystal ball.
Yeah.
We know you can't be perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, I was able to confirm. It was the member equity distribution that we received in the most recent year for the LAT policy, workers' comp policy, town and board combined was $57,471.
So where'd the rest of it come from then?
It could be either insurance claims where, like Maria said, somebody hit something and we got reimbursed for it, or it could be our workers' comp checks as well. If somebody's out on workers' comp, we do get an insurance reimbursement and it might be posted to that line as well.
Okay, so we'll get the 5-year look back for tomorrow night. Okay.
Could you just explain to a newcomer to this process what the operating transfers represent?
Oh, good question.
Oh, sure. So there are a couple of operating transfers included within the revenue line that are related to our Belden Trust. So we have a trust fund we call it the Belden Trust, and I think it's Kate Southwell and Darling.
And Belden.
Yes. And they provide certain money every year for us to fund activities through social services. So instead of just charging those activities to the trust fund, we take the money into the general fund so that in the general fund you're seeing the expenditures in whole. So we're not showing you a portion of your expenditures in the general fund and a portion in the special revenue fund. We're showing this is your total cost of the program, and then we transfer in the revenue from the special revenue fund to offset those expenditures. And then the other operating transfer in, which is the majority here, is we had a bond premium when we went out to issuance for fiscal 19 and fiscal 20 issuances, I believe. And those bond premiums are housed in our capital reserve fund. So then every year we take the amortized portion of that bond premium over the life of the bond, and we transfer that into the general fund to offset part of the debt service cost.
Is that the capital project fund? Is that what you call that?
No, that's the capital reserve fund.
And where is that in the book?
It's within your transfers.
I see Belden, ARPA, and capital project funds. What am I missing?
Maybe it just say capital reserve fund. It could be capital project.
And just so you note that, to your earlier question, the change here that I've identified is that the operating transfers went from 357,000 in the page we had before to 4.1 million, and I'm assuming that's ARPA.
Yes.
Did you find where that is?
It should just be capital reserve fund.
Is that in tab 2?
Are you looking for, you just said it was capital projects.
That's what I was, you had mentioned that in the operating transfers, that includes the transfer to pay for debt service. And I don't see that transfer under operating. I see build in ARPA and capital projects fund transfers.
Right, so the capital projects is about 300,000 or so. Yeah, that's the fund.
Okay, that was my question. Okay. Any other questions on revenues? Okay, moving on to expenditures. There is more good news. It looks like we are anticipating, based on what Amy had projected for us at the quarterly, about $650,000 in expenditure savings. So if you combine those two together, you get about $2.3 million more revenue at year-end close we are projecting, although it's not final. So you think, hooray, that's great news. But we have a few things that we know are on our table that we're going to have to deal with. The Board of Ed, we'll see how they handle with their operating challenge that they're facing. We know when we had our actuary, she recommended, and it will make a further recommendation to us, that we should make an additional pension payment. And we are in the process of doing an experience study, which may result in more obligations on the part of the town. And we had talked as a board that once we get all the information together, we may want to consider doing a supplemental appropriation or an assignment during the budget or an appropriation during the budget process towards the pension payment. So that is one thing. And then, of course, we know that the Latimer Lane project overruns are out there. So it seems like a lot of money. It will go very quickly, probably. So it's both good news and bad news, but it's mostly good news. So I did want to report that, and that will be, again, some policy decisions not only for this board, but recommended by staff and the Board of Selectmen and members of the public as to how we want to utilize that money. If we don't use it at all, it would go generally, once we have our general reserve fund at the level that our policy board has approved, which is 15 to 16% of the operating budget. If there is excess, we generally put it towards pension or capital reserve fund for future. We may use some of this excess and do something either called an assignment to deal with the debts service spikes in the next 2 years, so we could use that to pay down some of the debt service in the 2 years that it's spiking. So these are the conversations we're going to have in the next few weeks, starting in April 5th, April 19th, and beyond. So to the extent it's there, we'll probably put it to use. So now let's get into the really exciting stuff, which are the expenditures.
Tab.
Why don't we just go tab by tab? And I'm going to use Linda's tab because I have a different book. So we've done tab 2, tab 3.
Tab 3 is the, I pulled it out, it's this expenditure summary.
And we'll go to tab 5. So tab 5 is Board of Selectmen, Community Services. We do have a change here. Actually, I'm going to stop and let Amy and Maria and Melissa to note what are the changes in tabs 2, 3, and 4 the board and the public should be aware of.
So 2 and 3 are just the summary pages. The general government pages for tab 4.
Amy, before you go on to 2 and 3, what changed in 2 and 3, just so that we have that?
It's going to be a combination of everything that changed in the detail. I don't have offhand the summary changes. I only have the detail changes. So as we go through the detail changes, they translate into the summary tabs.
Okay, and the detail changes are in the other sheets. Okay, so then tab 4, which is Board of Selectmen Services, they did add a sheet that shows what the town manager and the Board of Selectmen are recommending for final, broken down by agencies. So members of the public can see which agencies are getting which amount of money.
You're going too fast here. Now we've
Okay.
got all this new paper.
That's-
Looking at this tab.
It looks like this.
Oh, it's that.
Okay. Then, we'll go on to tab 5. Amy, what is this thing you have 5 here?
So the tab 4, the change is actually.
That should be town manager, general government.
Right.
Tab 4.
So that change.
So do these coincide with tabs?
Yeah.
So this is tab 4? Tab 4
Or
looks,
should be, the title should be town manager, general government, that one.
okay, so the tabs are on the front of the page, not what follows after?
Tab 3 is 3 pages long. This is the fourth one.
Tab 4.
Okay.
Can we get this all digitized?
It's almost like, it's
It
almost
is,
I know this is.
and I actually have like a summary
Tab is
here.
on the page.
Okay.
This is tab. It'd be nice if we got this in advance.
Okay. All right, so tab 5, Melissa, is the expenditures of the community organizations?
Outside the Board of Selectmen and Community Services
Okay.
budget.
And then the detail sheets on those were updated? That
Yes,
follow?
the one agency application that's in there is just, that was inadvertently left off the budget book, so that's just included there.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions on expenditures in general government or the town manager's office at this point? Okay.
Tab 6.
Boards and commissions?
Questions there.
Is that 11?
No, we're,
Tab 6.
No changes to tab 6.
Boards and commissions, we had a question about. The aging and the $9,000 you talked about.
I don't remember. Don't bring up.
Maybe we were looking at.
Are we on tab 5 now?
Okay, so yeah, I think the question I had on, a couple of us had on
There's differences in tab 5.
the, and I'm working off of the summary
Right.
sheet, but the land use commissions. So the last 2 years, the actual amount of money spent was 8,000 and 7,000, but it was budgeted for the current year at 19,000. So coming in under what was budgeted. And you're requesting the same amount as was budgeted last year, but that's double what the actual expenditure was. It's small potatoes, but I'm just wondering why you need twice as much money when for 2 years you've shown you don't need it. You see what I'm saying?
11,000,
On
right?
the land use commissions. Well, I'm working off my old sheets because I don't know what you
From
put in
8 to
the new
19,
sheets.
right?
Referring to the land use hours?
I'm looking at the line on the expenditure summary that,
Yep, if you go to tab 6 and look at the detail for boards and commissions and land use commissions, and then the part-time line item. So one of the areas we've had a hard time recruiting and maintaining our part-time land use commission clerks. And so what we've had to do, particularly for the land use agencies, they've had a hard time, again, obtaining and maintaining clerks, is that our full-time staff is having to moonlight and cover those meetings and then flex their time. So we do lose that productivity when they're obviously not in the office doing their normal duties. So again, that decrease in expenditures is, again, in part just due to the difficulty we've had in finding good land use clerks that are reliable for them. So again, I don't think that's a long-term savings because, again, hopefully we'll be able to find them some good, reliable clerks, but that's why we've had the decrease.
So, but I'm wondering why you budgeted an increase. Well, I mean, it's not an increase compared to what you budgeted last year, it's an increase compared to
Year-end projection.
your actuals.
Your budget and requested are the same, 19,200.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. You've budgeted 19,000 for the last 2 years, but you've used only half of that for the prior 2 years.
Right, and that's because of the challenge we've had with finding clerks. Ideally, we would have the clerks and we would be appropriately.
Okay, so this is a vacancy issue.
Exactly, right. So these are similar to how you guys have a board clerk, land use commissions have clerks as well. And again, we've just had a really difficult time finding and maintaining folks for them.
And so it's a little not related to this tab alone, but we've talked about in the past budgeting some amount of savings because there always are vacancies.
So that's a great introduction. I had a great conversation with Maria. Maria, can you talk about that?
Yeah, so we did take a look. We went and looked at the last 5, fiscal years, fully completed fiscal years, in terms of budgeted salaries versus actual salaries. And we wanted to take a 5-year look back because, again, the last 2 years with the pandemic have been so unusual. And in terms of our voluntary resignation rates, they are relatively low. Over the last 3 years for voluntary resignation rates, we did a recent analysis, and that was around 3.9 to 6.5%. And then, again, very low for pandemic standards, but what we did find when we looked at budget versus actual salaries, the 2 years of sort of pandemic years, there was a difference of about 5.2%. In more normal years, it was 2.6%, 1.2%. If we looked at a 3-year average or a 3-year median, essentially not pandemic years, the difference in salary, we had a range of about 2.1 to 2.4%. If we looked at the 5-year median, which would include pandemic years, that was about 2.6%. If we wanted to perhaps budget conservatively, if it's something you're interested in doing, a vacancy rate for the organization, I would not recommend by department.
Correct.
But if we did it for the organization, maybe somewhere 1.5% to 2% of budgeted full-time salaries.
And that's, Maria, that's a significant amount that's 150,000. So we'll offset some of the increases that the Board of Selectmen made without really an impact to citizens or services, because it's something we always have. And Maria talked about how do you do that? And she had a great suggestion, which I support. And can you explain where that would go and what that might look like?
Yeah, so again, our thought was that we would want to show it for the organization as a whole. We would show it as a negative number. We could show it under operating transfers. We could show it as a negative number. We could show it, again, as its own line item, but for the organization as a whole. And again, it would just be as a negative number, essentially.
So one of the things I'd ask this board, this is something we asked Maria to do, the analysis we asked her to take. It does seem prudent, especially given our tax collection assumption rate, the amount of savings. We had 800,000 last year. We're looking at 650 this year. It does not seem like it's a huge risk to take, but it is a reasonable assumption to make. And makes a lot of sense. I'd ask Maria to come either tomorrow, if that's too soon, then for the hearing date, with a suggestion of where in the budget you would recommend we would put that as its own line item. It might be helpful to our board so that we can track it and see, are we doing a good job with it? Does it work? Or if it's not working, we can make an adjustment at a later time. But it seems like a very prudent recommendation. I want to just thank Maria for doing that analysis and sharing it with us. And to thank Linda for championing it. Okay, so we are still on tab 6. Are there any other questions on tab 6? Okay, we're going to go on to then tab 7, which is Registrar of Voters. Are there any questions on Registrar of Voters? You'll see the increases because of anticipated primaries and the gubernatorial election coming up. They are getting a pay raise at the next election cycle. As elected officials, they can't get pay raises in between, so it's a little bit higher than a year-to-year pay raise. One of the things, Maria, I had a minor question on this, but it sort of goes to a larger perspective, and it's a small amount. But the Registrar of Voters, oh boy, we're not going to be able to hold the election at Latimer. We need to pay for that, and they put it in their budget instead of the capital budget as an expense of the capital project. And when it's truly an expense of the capital project, it's dislocating a town service. So, talking with Amy, it's probably not administratively, it would be too big a pain to change it at this point, but going in the future to the extent. And I asked the Registrar of Voters, why did you do that? And she said, well, because we need it. Didn't occur to me to put it in the capital budget. So, something to think about, how we allocate costs. All right, moving on to tab 8. Town clerks.
Can you talk about the increase there a little bit, too? I think you're trying to fill a vacancy there, too, right? And that accounts for the increase over actuals?
So they are actually fully staffed. They are fully staffed now at this point in time. We are anticipating for the upcoming year a small increase in their computer software line item of about $1,800. And then the full-time increase that we're expecting mostly associated with step increases for our more junior members.
How many employees make up the town clerks?
Yeah, 3 full-time people.
Okay. Any further questions on the town clerk? Okay, we will move on to probate, and I think that's going to be a quick one. Any questions? Okay. Moving on to the finance department, we've been working with Amy throughout the year, so I think we have a good handle on what happens in her office, and we have Kelsey here too.
I think the people here need a raise.
Oh, there you go.
I don't see it budgeted.
Was that for the Board of Finance?
Paying for these waters.
You will see a repetition in this one about computer software. During the pandemic, actually, my brother's in education, he said they got a lot of stuff for free and people demoed it, and now that the pandemic's over and they've gotten used to the software, they're now charging you for the thing you now depend on. So there is some of that.
And so I'll just note again that there's a big increase in the assessor's office, and I think that's also due to filling a vacancy that's been vacant for a while. So I understand that point.
Yes, and also we have more junior members in that department as well, so there are planned step increases for them through their union contract.
And can you also speak about the backlog in the assessor's office and the additional revenue that is sitting on the shelf waiting for us? And what options we have to access that revenue and what it is and how that might help in the future years as we go through debt service.
Do you or Francine want to do that? Francine, do you want to, or would you like me to start and then you can jump in if I'm wrong?
Sure.
So we had a system in the planning department, and we have a system in the assessor's office. And the permitting system in the planning office does not talk to the assessor's office. That has recently been corrected. The planning department software has gotten upgraded to a new software, and now the softwares talk to each other. So Francine has been able to do an overall inventory of not only parcels, but permits that have been missed from the building department to the assessor's office. I don't remember what that number was offhand, so you can help me out with that if you remember it. But when we initially spoke to the backlog, it was about 2,500 parcels that she had estimated that we really need to get out there and revalue. Now, if you include the building permits, I believe it's about 14,000, 13,000.
Yeah, I came up with about $3 million in tax rates.
Right. So it's about 14,000 permits, I believe, in the backlog, which translates to approximately $3 million in revenue. The current staffing level that we have now does not accommodate hours and time for somebody to go out in the field and do that work. We have a contractor that helps us right now. Unfortunately, due to the volume, he's not able to take on the full scope of the work that needs to be done, and he's also somebody that's paid at a very high rate, and although he can bring back the changes to us, there's no input in the system because we need that data entry level person to be able to put those changes into the system to generate the revenue. So that's why we had asked for that temp position last year, to try to get somebody in to accomplish not only the valuation but the data entry, so that we can start collecting on the revenue that's due to us of approximately $3 million offhand. Unfortunately, we were not successful this year because it was a temporary position. So a temporary position that's part-time, no benefits, very hard to recruit for, did not get a lot of takers for it. And then in the assessor industry alone, if you just look at statewide postings, assessors' offices are having trouble recruiting in and of itself. How am I doing, Francine? Good. So I think that's probably the best summary for why we have the request that we do, so that we can try to generate that revenue.
So the obvious question from our board is that, is it 3 million new revenue that would be added to the grand list?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that would take care of the debt service spike. Is there some reason we're not throwing a lot of resources to this?
We just
Position in there.
We just need somebody to apply.
Yeah, but if it's a full-time benefited position, even if it costs you $150,000 or whatever, with benefits and all, it
Exactly.
brings in $3 million.
Right.
So that's why we tried to increase the spend for this year, so that we could attract somebody, either a full-time position or perhaps a contracted service if we can't find somebody full-time, so that we can try to get.
So our question, is that enough? Because if it is, and it will capture the revenue, we could do a revenue increase as an offset, so that is then tax neutral to our residents.
Right.
And we would be interested in that analysis.
Actually, a tax decrease.
Right.
So, I don't like to count my chickens before they hatch. I'd like to have the person on board before we start estimating a revenue increase, because we did that last year and that didn't come to fruition because we couldn't find anybody. And also, as far as the backlog goes, I don't know if we would get that $3 million in 1 year. Francine could speak to that more than I can. But going through 14,000 permits, I don't know if that takes a year. I don't know if it takes 6 months. I don't know if it takes 2 years. I don't know how long is a reasonable expectation to generate that revenue.
Can you reach back more than 1 year for that revenue? If somebody's had whatever should have been taxed for 3 years, you can't go back more than 1.
In certain instances, we can go back 3 years.
So there is some
there's a lot of money on the table.
And there's urgency here. So if we do budget the vacancy, that's $150,000 neutral that could be used for this position. Do you need 2 people to do that to capture this? We don't want to leave money on the table. And the last question is, we are in a reval year. Wouldn't these not be captured during reval?
In a reval year, yes, you're capturing certain items that have been missed, yes. However, looking back, there's a lot of items that are not also. So that's why that I've been pushing, I've been saying that with proper staffing in the assessor's office, going forward, you're always you're staying on top, you're staying current with what permitted work is being, done. So you're not falling behind, trying to recoup back what you've missed over 5 years, 10 years. So in staying current, you're not going to be trying to recoup missing revenue. And I did mention that an appraiser and a clerk really is what we would need to, but I'm asking for at least an appraiser to help out with the what is really needed at this point in time.
So
that answer.
But that appraiser doesn't want to do data entry, and it's probably not the best use of somebody's skills if they're that high-level person.
Well, there are positions, yes, that individual is actually gathering the data, doing field work. and actually putting it into the camera system, okay? So they're doing both because you're picking up the information that you're picking out in the field.
So they do it in
Then
the
after
post.
it has to be, assessed and put into the camera system. So yes, there's a lot of stuff that could be put in with a clerk entry stuff, but not everything.
Are there contracting companies that do this kind of work that we could engage to just come in here and do a blitz on this big backlog? I mean, if you're time limited to look back for 3 years and we've missed 3 years worth of, I mean, we're talking about a lot of money here. It might be worth.
So that's what we're gonna try to get as much as we can with the
But if you
revow
hire
company.
one person,
But it's just.
It's gonna be slow. I'm saying,
Yeah.
is there a company we could hire to really get in there and do all of it quickly?
We can look into it, but the way I have the contract written up too with the revow company is trying to gather, some of that backlog. Because now that we already have that data in the camera system, the permits that we didn't have the data for, we know what those items are, that
are missing.
locked items. So we're gonna go after those. But then going forward, any new permits that are going into the system, we want to be able to stay on top of it and not let it fall behind.
So you think revalue will recapture some of the backlog?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
But will
really
you-
about
but
taking
will-
the future.
But will you capture it for the retroactive 3-year period?
We can't, on most of these items, we cannot.
Legally?
I said certain items you can go back, but it's not, we can't go back 3 years.
Is it a
on that
practical
stuff.
restriction or a legal
No.
restriction?
It's by statute, there's a lot of items that you cannot.
So it's illegal, you cannot do it by law, right?
Yeah, no.
So we don't want to be
It
in this
depends on what the circumstance is.
So some of them there are.
Depends on the circumstance.
Okay, so Marie, if you could get us updated numbers there, especially now that we found a potential way to pay for them without increasing taxes, that would be terrific. All right. Moving on to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
One more question. I know, maybe this is sort of the same thing, but we had talked about many months ago about whether there might be some value to having someone assist, an expert consultant brought in to assist in projecting future grand list. And I'm sort of hearing now that, we some months ago had projections of really tiny grand list growth in the coming years when we're facing all these big increases in debt service. And it turned out that this year we had much greater grand list growth than what was projected. For the improvement of accuracy, was there any discussion of budgeting that consultant that we talked about to help the assessor make more accurate projections in the future?
I'll maybe start off. So some of it, I don't think that we would have a value add by bringing in an expert. So, and again, some of it is date driven just in terms of how our process works. And a good example is the motor vehicle list and when that's published. That's usually not published until December annually. Sometimes it's mid-December. And that's essentially a standard form of valuation for our motor vehicles. And then, of course, it was a statewide phenomenon. We saw that huge increase. Bringing in a consultant in July, October, they would most likely not have been able to predict that. And we won't have that information into, again, December, say, for example. Another example where that would not have been helpful in the current year was some of our utility companies performed work that does not require permits, but it increased the personal property. So again, that's just something that would not have been on our radar. There wouldn't have been a way to pick that up. And those were two of the major increases that we saw this year that were unanticipated. So again, those are some of the kinds of things that are unanticipated year to year. Bringing in an expert isn't going to help us capture that. Those are just, things that happen.
Can I add to that? So yeah, we try to project as you require us to do. So sitting with planning, what's being approved coming down the road, we do look at that. Not everything happens when it's supposed to happen either, but we do. I've been looking at that, trying to sit down and get that information. And with that, too, trying to stay conservative, because you're trying to forecast ahead of time based on what might be coming down. Is it going to come to fruition at, a certain period of time, over 2 years, 3 years, new development, and then the valuation of all that, too. We try to contact the developers, when we know about that. So again, even at that point, it's an estimate, so.
So you do reach out to the developers themselves to find out how much they're investing?
Certain ones, the ones that we know about, yes, try to get an idea. They contact us too, because they want to know what their taxes are going to be sometimes, so we try to estimate based on the data that they give us.
And we talked about doing some audits. I know you're doing personal property audits. And some of the valuations, especially, I think 5 of our top 10 taxpayers are now apartments, and those do rely on vacancy and rents charged to determine how much taxes they pay. Do we audit that type of situation too, or no, or is there value in that?
We can. The assessor can definitely audit that type of items.
Like what you
I
would
don't.
generally do is look, basically comp set, right? I mean, you'd look across the recent sales and just draw your kind of competitive set and maybe extrapolate what that value would be on a cap rate basis or
Yeah,
income
depend-
basis.
Yep.
You can find out what the rents are pretty easily.
Yeah, depending on what type of property it is,
Right,
what
right.
type of use. If it's a special use that we don't have around here, then we'll go looking for something similar to give us an idea.
Yep.
Definitely. Just like when Big Y was being built, before when it's going to come up, I went around looking newer ones about the same square footage, what the value was to get an idea of what it was going to be.
But some of the stuff is
So-
self-reports, and they're legally required to be accurate, but sometimes people make errors or.
Trust but verify.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that in New York with the ex-president, right? So people have different opinions as to what, and you can justify it, it doesn't mean they're wrong, but it might mean that the town disagrees with it, so.
So you get ballpark, and that's what that we try to use to project down the line.
I guess one thing we would say is there a value of doing formal periodic audits of the self-reported organizations?
Well, that we do.
We do.
And that I had put into the budget for business and personal property,
But that wouldn't include apartment rentals, which is also self-report, right?
Yeah.
Madam Chair, what I'm finding a little amorphous here to get the arms around is that there clearly is a lot of operational demand on this personnel, just running it. That's clear. You get your hands full. Secondly, it's a classic cost-benefit study. There is a benefit of revenue to be gained by increased personnel and investment in the procedures. How much is that benefit, and how much would it cost to get the people into it? I mean, it is possible we could be looking at a couple $1 million here, and we don't have the people because we probably haven't made the offer to retain them significant enough. So as an overseer, I'm finding it a little frustrating because I don't know what the potential to gain additional revenue is against the cost that we would have to put into it, but
And the timing of
the
it.
timing of it. So I empathize with the demand, but I also do see that there may be a potential here for the town to invest more in the personnel and systems which would bring in the increased revenue, and that might be something worth looking into.
And keep in mind that the town is growing. There's a lot of development going on.
All the more reason to, I think that reinforces the point I'm making, actually.
So Maria, I don't know how quickly you can have that, but probably not by tomorrow, but by April 5th, if you could just sort of get us an analysis.
We should be able to put something together for you.
Okay, thank you.
What I'm hearing, Maria, is that there aren't enough people out there to fill the jobs that already exist out there. So we would have to pay an above-market salary to recoup that. And then in years where we didn't make or recapture, we would still be paying that person's salary in perpetuity for that next year or for that next big windfall. And if we're staying on top of it, we shouldn't have to do that. So it's really kind of a one-time thing that we're thinking about spending above market salaries to, recapture to.
And is it worth it? Yeah.
Right,
But what
exactly.
I heard was we weren't offering it was a part-time, temporary position.
Yes.
And so I think what we're saying is if you made it not
Full-time.
necessarily above market,
Yeah.
but a real position, would that be better?
And
Yeah, I
what
think
is
that's
too,
fair.
what is too expensive? I mean,
Right.
at what point do you say, it's just not worth spending all that money because the probable return isn't large enough? It'd be interesting to have a sense of that.
Yeah,
Yeah, again, I think Amy mentioned this earlier, we are finding in some of our more specialized fields throughout the state, and actually there was some recent legislation proposed to try to help get more people trained in fields like assessment and property appraisal, building officials, municipal finance folks, like there's just an incredible shortage of people, and some civil engineers, again, doing municipal work, doing that work in Connecticut. And so, right, that could be a challenge, which is why we have talked about, maybe it's a contracted service that we potentially find, maybe it's a person who wanted to be an employee. It's just hard to say, and again, the market for assessors and property appraisers is pretty tough right now.
So I guess you're hearing from our board, there's a strong leaning towards finding some way to take care of this, because the potential will help every department.
Whether it's
Wouldn't
contracted
using
person or
a- I'm
salary.
sorry.
Yeah, Bert.
Wouldn't using a contracted service address the problem that Derek raised? That,
Yes.
even if we overpaid for the contracted service, it would be a one-time
Yes.
expenditure.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite following the question.
Well, if our concern is that we're going to pay above market rate for a position that is going to bring us significant returns for a year or two and then remain on the books in perpetuity, maybe this would be a situation where it would make sense to use a contracted vendor, even if we paid above market rates. It would be a one-time expense, and we'd get our return.
Yeah, again, I think we'll look at all of our options.
Going on to planning and development.
Tab.
We are now on tab 12. We had the complicated situation of the reallocation of money, where it looked like it wasn't reallocated, but was actually an increase of about $9,000. The note said it was a reallocation from building to planning to split the cost, but it looked like the overall increase was an additional $9,000. So could you just sort of clarify that? What happened there?
So it's twofold. We did work on this budget closely with our building official, who's been here for quite some time. And the software does serve the entire department. Building is part of the planning department. So through conversations, we thought it made sense for the planning division budget and the building division budget to each reflect 50% of the cost of the software that the department as a whole uses. We also made sure to go back and look at our current contract for service for that permitting software, and we made sure to appropriately budget the amount of the contract. So there was also an increase to that line item to reflect the cost of the contract.
So it used to be $9,000 in one department. We decided to split it between two departments, and now it's $20,000.
I believe I have to go back and look. I think I want to say the total cost of the software per year for that department is about $18,000, but we can confirm the exact amount.
No, it's right here. Yeah, that's about right. But it wasn't just splitting it, it was splitting it and increasing the total amount. Okay.
Sean actually had that same question. It was just a little confusing the way it was split here.
So is that a satisfactory answer?
It is, I understand it.
Glad you do.
And you gave us a new sheet in tab 11. Okay, we have that. We're now moving on to tab 13, police. So police is our second biggest budget. And one of our largest increases this year, about $500,000. So does anyone have any questions on the police department?
Well, I have a question about the service dog, but I would want to discuss, if anyone has questions about the larger budget items first, I think that would be appropriate.
Yeah, I would do that. So we're looking to hiring 2 new police officers and switching the CALIA person off of administrative, so hiring a civilian to do that. So that gives you 3 new patrol officers. We've confirmed for the record, and I hope our clerk, thank you to our clerk who is somewhere in the cloud right now. Just confirm for the record, Chief, that there's no new requests for vehicles other than the service dog vehicle funded by ARPA, correct?
There's a request for 3 patrol vehicles in the budget.
That's our regular operating budget
Yes,
request.
yep. And then there's an admin vehicle request also.
Also regular
Also
base
there, yep.
base budget, but
Correct.
beyond that.
Beyond that, and beyond the ARPA vehicle, no other vehicles.
Okay, so thank you, clerk, for putting that in the minutes, confirmed by the chief. Then the second thing, are you going to be able to hire all these people, 3 new people on July 1?
We don't know. So the greater advance notice we have to put the notice out there, the more likely we are to be able to hire somebody that quickly. I know that the other communities are really struggling with finding applicants. It's been very difficult. In fact, there were conversations today at the meeting we were at about the difficulties. We will try our best to do that. We have had some very good luck the last year with hiring. I think that this is a very attractive community to work in. So I hope we would be able to. And given that, we all know that it could take up to 18 months before that person is actually on the road and by themselves.
Maria, the standard practice is, do you advertise before referendum, or do you wait till after referendum to begin?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for new positions, service improvement positions, we do wait until after the referendum just to ensure with certainty that the position is funded for July 1. So we typically advertise sometime after the referendum date.
And in the hiring of the last 2 officers, it did take you on average 18 months?
Yeah, so they were hired in, I think it was June of last year, and they're still in training right now, not on their own, on the road, and they are progressing not just as expected, but very well. So there's been no delay in it. They both had to go to the police academy, and then they both returned here for the 14-week field training and evaluation program.
So one of the things that sort of struck me and may strike the members of the public, 3 new officers and no decrease in either holiday pay or overtime. Can you sort of speak to that?
Sure. So the holiday pay is contractually, all the members of the police union get 11 holidays each year. And it's split up twice a year, once in December and once in June. They get 5 in December for the previous 6 months, 6 in June for the previous 6 months. And they get to choose. They get to choose whether they want to take that as cash for compensation or vacation time. And so what we have seen over the last 5 or 6 years is it went from mostly taking cash down to taking vacation time a lot more. So our expenditure in that account went from almost 90% down to 67% or 77% last year. So either this year or the year before was, this year I believe was our second year where instead of projecting or putting the amount of money needed in there if everybody took cash, we took a look at that 5 or 6 year period and we went down to, I believe it was 95% one year. Thank you.
85.
Oh, yeah. I think it was 95% the first year. This current year is 85% of what we would need if everybody put in for cash instead of vacation time. So adding 2 additional officers to the payroll would be adding 22 additional holidays that we'd have to account for. So I mean, those numbers are a risk that we're taking. I think we're doing very well with the 85%, and there's a little bit of wiggle room there if we needed to adjust that either way. But again, it's a risk because it could be a year that everybody is looking to put in for cash, and we do not ask them in advance of that to be able to project what they're going to do for the full year.
Is it a contractual obligation that you offer cash? Because I firmly believe people need vacation for their mental health, and The notion that somebody would work an entire year and not take any vacation is, especially,
These are holidays, not.
you said vacation, okay.
It's a holiday
Please
pay.
tell me they're taking time off.
They are, and roughly 40% of our overtime shifts are because of vacation use.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
I feel better now.
So I hope that answers your question about the holiday pay, because adding 2 more people is 22 additional holidays in order to have that money available if we need to. But again, this budget is looking for 85% of what we would need. And that was a good number that we thought we should go with.
So you've already lowered the holiday pay based on the experience, but it went up because of the 2 new officers, right?
2 more eligible.
And probably the contractual increases as well.
Oh, yeah, it goes up because of the wages go up.
And can you speak to the overtime? If you hire 3 new officers on July 1?
Yes.
Are you still going to have an overtime problem?
Yes, yeah. So especially in that year, if we are looking at hiring, say, July 1, and it's not hiring 3 new ones, it's hiring 2. If they are not certified officers, we will not see them the entire year, the entire fiscal year, helping out with our overtime at all. It could be up to 18 months if we were to hire them right away. Now, there is a possibility. I'm sorry?
The training is that long.
Because the training is that long. Now, it's a possibility like we have had in the past, and we're roughly about 50% of our hires are already certified. So we're not talking an 18-month period. Once they are hired, we're talking potentially 3 months. But that's if we find somebody who is already a certified police officer, then we're looking at potentially that. So we did hire one in July, and so I believe he was on the road in October or November. He was certified from another state, went through a comparative process here, went through our training here, modified program, very well experienced officer, and was then on the road in October, November. So that's the reason, one of the reasons why that overtime would not go down. But if we also look back, and we were talking a little bit about like vacancy rates. So over the last 5 or 6 years, our vacancy rate is sort of all over the place for people who have retired and not being able to fill positions. If we look at annually, it has fluctuated between 1 and 3.5 to almost 4 vacancies at certain times. But if you look at like months within that year, sometimes it's 3, 4 officers that are vacant for periods of time. Now, we're hoping that we don't have that. We are fully staffed right now, and we're hoping to continue that. But the other big factor in that is the injury time and vacation usage. So there are periods where we don't have those 39 officers available. Unfortunately, we had an officer that was injured badly last year, and he was out for about 8 months. So he was not in the pool whatsoever. We've had other illnesses and non-work-related injuries that have put people out for a long time, and that just pulls away at that pool. What really came to our attention last fall was the amount of overtime that people were being ordered to be here for. So it just so happened that in 2021, about 40% of our overtime shifts, it's an 8-hour shift, 40% of those shifts, the person didn't want to be here. They were here 8 hours beyond their 8 hours, they were here on their day off. Oftentimes it's last minute or 2 days notice, advance notice. We've never seen the numbers like that before. I went back and looked, and they were more like 13%, 17%, 25% of our overtime was we were ordered to stay. So that was another driving factor for our request of getting 6 officers, because as you mentioned earlier, like the health and well-being of the organization is so detrimental to the level of service that we provide that we want people to come into work and expect to be here for 8 hours unless there's an emergency. Then they realize, and that's what they're here for. But not to come in every shift and wonder, am I going to get ordered in on my day off? Am I going to get ordered to stay?
And is the pay for holiday time and overtime the same?
Yes.
Am I remembering that the Board of Selectmen did cut some overtime? No. We asked.
Chief,
I'm sorry, this year or last?
This year.
This year was...
No, I mean for this coming budget.
One of the things that I think was mentioned earlier that was a little bit of a concern to me was the number of potential retirements next year. Is there a process by which they probably don't need to legally notify you much longer than, I don't know, a month or two, but how much comfort or, do you have that there will be, call it 3 to 6 potential retirements next year? That's where, that's where I would want to try and fill those spots, stagger those, so that you're not, in a situation where you're short.
So those retirements are expected, not in this coming fiscal year, but a month after, so starting in July of 2023.
And how many?
And there's 2 that month, there's 1 the next month, and then within the next, the continuing that same fiscal year, there's 2 more, and then again, July of 2024, there's another one. So there's 6 within about 13 months that are eligible to retire.
Okay.
I can tell you what the pattern or the trend has been here over the last 5 years. You get to your 25 years, this is a lot of stress on somebody for 25 years. It's a lot of stress on your family. People are looking to get out after 25 years. Throughout the state, we're having a really difficult time hiring officers. People are leaving when they're eligible to leave. The state is losing hundreds of troopers this year alone. We have 11 police chiefs that have left since October of last year. So I would expect that many of those who are eligible will be leaving as soon as they are.
And what's that retirement age, just out of curiosity?
It's actually 25.
25,
Yeah,
sure.
25 years is sort of what you go. The contract actually has 2 different aspects to it. It's 25 or age 53, whichever is sooner.
Yep.
But 25 is generally the safe number to go by.
Thanks.
The amount of notice they have to give you is about 2 weeks?
It's 2 weeks by town policy only, and it's very rare that we have an officer retire and then do nothing.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of trying to coordinate getting into a new job.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to give an actual. I think we're very lucky with the last 2 that retired, where they were able to give us a little bit more time, actually a couple months' notice.
Okay, any more questions on the police?
Yeah, so Wendy opened by saying there'd be a lot of discussions about the dog because I've been giving her a hard time about it. So I want to be clear that it's easy to ridicule these things, but I understand Wendy has provided me with a lot of literature about it, that this is a meaningful program that a lot of towns have successfully employed. And what I've read suggests that these dogs have advantages in comforting victims of traumatic situations, and also in promoting community relations. So my concern here is not so much that it's silly to have a dog, but that we're lucky enough in this community to have good police-community relations and fewer traumatic events than other townships. So I'd like to hear from you as the chief about whether you think in this particular jurisdiction it's worth the money to bring in this dog.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for asking the question, because I think this is a discussion that we're all very proud of. This is something that we're looking forward to, excited about this program. I would have to say 99.9% of the people that we have talked to about this program immediately get excited, and they may not even know all the value in the program at that point, but just the whole idea of this, of having that type of dog here is exciting for people. I absolutely do think it will be a tremendous value and a benefit here, regardless of our frequency of crises. I started visiting with dog handlers of police departments in Connecticut for this type of dog last summer, and heard all the stories. And some of those communities are similar to ours, but the incidences that happen there happen here as well. And one example is a woman who was going through a mental health crisis, and she needed to go to the hospital. And the officers had been talking with her for a considerable amount of time. She was not going. Prior to putting their hands on her and forcing her to go, another officer showed up who had this dog, was talking with her, noticed that she was an animal lover, told her she had her dog downstairs, and the woman changed like that for just a second, walked down on her own, walked into the ambulance, accompanied by the dog. And there was no injury or anything that resulted of this. So it was a very good use of the dog in a crisis. We have had traumatic incidences here where our police officers can make use of that dog while they're recovering from what happened here, while they're writing their reports, whatever it may be, a little bit of downtime. We've made moves along the way for peer support programs, for having a police chaplain here. This dog is going to fit very nicely into that program. One last pitch. People sort of had similar questions when we started our school resource officer program, because our schools were not filled with incidents that happened throughout the country here, where police officers were in schools to make sure everybody was safe. It was a different style of program that we were looking at. And just over the last, say, 7 or 8 years with Officer Todd Cushman in the elementary schools and the middle school, there isn't a single student who cannot say that they do not know who Officer Cushman is, Officer OK, Officer Todd, they absolutely love him. And what that has done is that has broken down the barriers for people who don't normally have interactions with the police, don't know these police officers personally, know the police for what they see on TV, for what people hear about them, and now they have Officer Cushman. And not just for the child or the student, but for their family too, because they hear about Officer Cushman, they get to meet him. They see him driving through the parking lot, and he sees them and knows them by name. Same thing is going to happen with that dog. People are going to want to see whatever the dog's name is. They're going to want to see that dog. They're going to want to see social media things about that dog. They're going to want to come to the police department to talk with the police officers, to learn about prevention, to learn about safety while they're petting a dog. So I think it's going to be a fantastic program, and yes, this town will definitely benefit from it.
And just from a financial perspective, so it's $70,000 not being paid by property taxpayers. It's being paid by the American Rescue Fund for the equipment and the stuff. So the operating impact is $10,000. They spend about $1,500 a year on vet. The food is about $2,000. So after that, it's about $8,000 stipend, which is a little over what? Not that much a month. I don't know. Amy, help me out with that. 8,000 divided by 12. I don't know what that is.
Cheap. Cheap for the program.
Yeah, okay, so now you're talking your language.
Right, I'm talking like, and you're absolutely right. So just to touch briefly on that stipend, we have to pay the handler to care for that dog outside of work hours. So that handler will have that dog 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So we have to come up with a contractual understanding with the union about what that compensation is going to be. We have looked at other communities, other similar dogs, and we have kind of worked on that, and we'll be able to present that to the union at some point real soon. So that's what that stipend is for. Not that we want to go with this, but it's almost guaranteed that people from the community are going to come together and want to be part of this dog program and help with some of those additional expenses. We've already reached out to the vets, and they've given us an approximate of what it would take to do general wellness for the dogs, to provide food for the dog. Our former animal control officer, Mark Lewis, has discussed this with so many different businesses and people, and there will be people coming out of the woodwork who want to support this program. I would say it's safe to initially make sure that we have that in the operating budget, and then reassess for what we will need year after year as far as the regular maintenance of the dog, harnesses, food, things like that.
Will the officer who has the dog be engaged in the same, will the nature of their work change substantially, or are we basically going to be losing an officer who's doing normal stuff to be the dog guy?
So we feel that the community services officer is a perfect place for that dog here.
So he already exists?
That position already exists, has existed for many, many years, works very closely with social services, goes out and does a lot of prevention, a lot of education. It fits really nicely with that position here. So it's not a new position, it's just adding a program to his current function.
So it's more a program increase as opposed to a personnel.
The bigger piece this year is the vehicle, though, right? I mean, yeah, and my only concern there is there was mention of, the Tahoes that were ordered that we don't have yet. If it was there, I would say yes, but if I knew that you weren't gonna get the vehicle for another 12 months, that's where I struggle to allocate the dollars today. So do you have any insight on when you might be getting those, or maybe it's a different manufacturer, maybe it's Ford versus?
So one is Chevy, one is Ford.
Right.
So we are getting the Ford Interceptors in.
Okay.
There is not that significant delay. There was one portion of Chevy that was having an issue. They have since resolved that, and hopefully we'll see the Tahoes soon.
Okay, great.
But no, this is one of the existing ones. They are producing those. They are coming through. In fact, they're way behind because last year's have finally come through. This year we haven't received this year's yet.
Okay.
Okay. Are we ready to move on from police?
I'm
go
gonna
ahead.
excuse myself and call in from here, and I'll be online. I just
Okay.
have.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you.
You'll be the scary voice on the machine.
I'll try not to yell.
Okay, we'll move on to engineering. We are getting new restructuring. Congratulations to Tom on hiring a deputy engineer. I did confirm with Maria that they have budgeted a lower salary range into the current budget to accommodate that structural change. And Maria, can you just verify that, confirm that for the record? Okay, our clerk will note that the town manager verified that. Are there any other questions in engineering?
Yeah, there was a question that you had. but
I don't remember. I didn't bring my notes.
I just wrote down that you had a question.
I don't remember. I didn't bring it. All right. So we'll go on to tab 15, which is Public Works. And there is one line item that did not have an increase. It increased $125, when every other person is seeing increased costs. So we'll ask Tom to speak to that. What's going on there? You can guess the line item. I'll see if I could, I will see. CNR road improvements. It was budgeted last year at $1,017,840, and same this year, and it's only increased $125 when every other expenditure line item has gone up. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that. It's the bottom line. Yep.
No, I think, you know, and the roads are always fun discussions, unknown where it comes from, and it's, as you mentioned, coming from a number of different sources. The number that we've been using is really just a rolling average that we've had for a couple of years. There are some years where we're going to get better pricing on pavement, and some years where we're going to get worse pricing on pavement. This year will be worse. This year, right now, we're looking at probably a 15% increase in the cost of pavement right now. The cost actually fluctuates throughout the paving season, week to week. We pay the same price that the state of Connecticut pays, so we get a really good price on the asphalt, but then it's modified based upon the price of liquid asphalt as it's priced in New Haven Harbor. So there's an adjustment factor. The reality is we may end up paving slightly fewer roads this year. At the same time, we're going to use a couple of different techniques in some of our roads this year that I think will put us in a good position to keep maintaining our roads in the condition they've been at.
And you made some points at the Board of Selectmen meeting about the different types of paving that you're going to explore. I think they'd be interesting for the rest of my
I know
board
Lisa
to hear.
loves paving. She is right there. She's been a big fan of paving since the beginning. But one of the things that's worked out so well over the past 12 years since we've moved to a program of pavement preservation, where instead of paving the worst roads, many years ago, we started paving roads to keep them at a level of we were simply resurfacing, not rebuilding them. And that costs in the neighborhood of $8 to $12 a square yard. If we were doing like so many other towns where you wait till the road is in horrible condition, you're looking at upwards of $25 to $30 a square yard. So orders of magnitude more. And because we've done a good job of maintaining our roads in good condition, we are doing it in that $8 and $12 range. And now we're actually looking at resurfacing some roads that may have only been resurfaced 7 or 8 years ago with thinner overlays. So again, we're going even to a higher level of just keeping good roads good, and it's a much lower cost than reconstructing roadways. So we're really starting to see more and more benefit from our years of hard work on this.
One of the things Tom, remind me of the numbers, but working, it's true, we've done a lot with roads. But it was normally, I think, when we started this, it was about 1.8 million a year we were spending on roads, and that's because we had a road improvement policy, because our roads were an inferior thing. Then, I think it was 2016 or 17, I can't remember which budget, but the Board of Selectmen, when I was on the Board of Selectmen, made a policy decision that we had gotten our roads to a level that was acceptable. I think it was 84% rating. And once we got to that, we said, okay, now we can make the policy decision. We don't need Cadillac roads.
Well,
Hondas.
yeah, we were paving 15 miles a year to get to the standard that we were at. Now we're paving roughly 10 miles a road a year, which keeps the average age of the roads no more than 17 years. So we're resurfacing every 17 years, which keeps up with the rate of deterioration.
And that was about a $600,000 savings for the taxpayer, I think.
Exactly. So you were getting a return on your investment. We're still managing that investment. So we may end up paving nine miles this road year with traditional, and we may do a couple of miles with that thinner overlay. But in general, we're trying to stretch the dollars.
So I remember that pretty well, huh, Tom? Are there any other questions on road pavement? Okay, moving on to 16, we do have a new page on that. Community and Social Services. One of the questions I had asked Amy in advance is, we are budgeting social services as an expenditure in the line item budget. And, but we're not doing that on the Board of Ed side. We're budgeting that social worker in a special revenue budget. And one of the concerns I think we all have is what happens to the Clifton, and how do we communicate to the public that this is a grant-funded position, other than doing it publicly in a meeting like this, but how do we do it from an accounting perspective, and what's the best way to fund it? So part of it's related to the fact of how we're taking American Rescue Fund as a revenue source, but we're not treating it the same in the Board of Selectmen budget as we are in the Board of Ed, so I just wanted to let Amy speak to that.
So the Board of Education has a grant fund. So the Board of Education cannot take in revenues in their operating budget, their town revenues. So they have to account for their social workers in their grant fund. So the grant money goes into their grant fund and the expenditure comes out of their grant fund. Whereas the town is different, the town can have revenues, so therefore we show the social worker as part of the operating budget, as it is part of the operating budget, and then we have the income or the revenue source come in via the revenue stream.
So it's not technically a grant though, because we're taking in revenue for the entire town. So they're not getting a grant, so it doesn't have to go into their revenue fund. It could just be an expenditure of the town, similar to the way the town does it. Because it's not grant money at this point.
I mean, maybe. So then,
it's just, consistent, I mean, to the extent we can have consistency of how we account for things. One of our jobs is to recommend by charter how to account for things. So it's just a question on consistency and whether it makes sense to do them consistently. Maybe too big a pain in the neck at this point to change it, but I just raise it as a question.
Yeah, I could bring it back tomorrow with the changes if you want it.
I was just gonna say, I had just not a concern, but the way it looks in the budget, if you didn't know that was funded through ARPA and you were just looking at our budget, you would just think we added a social worker, right? Unless the messaging was around that. So I kind of have the same way of it.
I think I would just increase their budget. I would just give them an expenditure increase, really.
And you don't need to, but I think the problem we're trying to solve for is how does the public and future policy boards know that this is a grant-funded position? Because if you just, to Wendy's point, if you just look at it in the line item, it doesn't stand out as obvious. Whereas at the Board of Ed, it does, because it's in their special revenue fund as a grant-funded. So how can we, and maybe it's as simple as highlighting it. Yeah, an asterisk.
Yeah.
All right, are there any other questions on the social worker position? There is a cliff. The Board of Ed does have a plan to address the cliff. They're going to slowly add it into their operating budget using the education non-lapsing fund. They do some savings, although that may get swept with, if they come in with a cost override, but they do have some thoughts about how to work it in. To them, it was a priority, but they did plan it out. I think, Maria, your plan is to do the evaluation with metrics, and at the end of 2 years, then the board, next, whatever Board of Selectmen there will have to make a decision whether that's a priority spend or whether they want to prioritize something else.
We also still have we don't use all the ARPA funding, because originally they asked for 4 years, right? So we did the 2 years, so potentially, if we aren't recovered in 2 years, we could do another year or something like that, depending on the thing, without a full loan commitment.
So your board could make a decision not to spend and save for those 2 years in case there is
Yeah, we could, yeah.
Okay, so that would be one way to deal with a short-term cliff.
Yeah. Yep.
Any questions from members of the board on that? Okay. Moving on to
Library.
library.
Oh, no, sorry, Parks and Recs, right?
Do we know? I'm still 17. I have library.
Yeah, I
Do
have
you have
library.
Okay. I just had a minor question. What is the maintenance on the new loan lockers, Lisa?
Well, just like when you purchase any new equipment, there's maintenance costs to maintain the equipment.
What is a loan locker?
The loan lockers we actually purchased through ARPA funds through the Connecticut State Library, and it allows people to have curbside access 24/7. As you know, during the pandemic, we started curbside service. It was very popular. So now we have maintenance on the loan lockers.
So I know school lockers, there's no maintenance, so.
Well, but these are, I mean, there's a computer system in the lockers so that you can pick up your materials with a code or a QR code that interacts with your phone or your smart device.
It's like an Amazon pickup box.
Yeah.
Getting old.
It happens to the best of us.
Especially to me, as you well know.
Are there any further questions on the library?
Not from the budget perspective.
Moving on to tab 18, which are benefits. We did ask Maria and Amy, is this the health insurance fund? Am I on the right tab?
Has
No,
our health insurance
not yet.
included, but it's not the health insurance tab.
Okay.
I've got major medical at the top, is that what you mean?
Major medical is not the healthcare fund. Can you talk about how that differs from the healthcare fund?
It's insurance.
So
$3 million.
major medical includes the health insurance, but also includes other things like our employee assistance programs and the contribution to the health insurance fund for the HSA programs. Actually, hold on, I have some big pads. Breakdown. We also have our retiree health insurance that goes through here that does not go through our health insurance fund, our HSA contributions, which is what I just talked about. The health insurance waivers and our employment screenings and our employee assistance program, in addition to the premiums.
Any questions on this? All right, let's go on to 19.
So,
we do have a question.
So, sorry, I'm doing multiple things at once. So the health insurance fund is not in this tab, right? You just said?
No.
And, okay, when we get there.
Isn't it included within major medical?
No, it's separate. So there's two health funds. There's the self-insured one, which is the health insurance fund, which we always get updates
Right.
on. And then there is this additional major medical health insurance. So there are
Which is like stop loss.
two sources.
Stop loss.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
This stop loss, this applies to all town employees, including employees of the Board of Education.
The health insurance fund
Yeah,
does,
covered,
yes,
yeah.
not the line item.
Not the major medical. The Board of Ed has their own major
They
medical.
have their own, yeah.
So it's in tab 20 then.
Okay. Then going on to general liability and insurance. See, that's pretty much flat. Does anyone have any questions on that?
So that's where the health insurance is
Nope.
Well, so where, I'm sorry, where is the health insurance then? 'Cause you-
Tab 25, I believe, is the health insurance fund.
okay.
We're getting there.
All right.
Yeah, that's
It's mostly
25.
working off of your
Yeah.
summary sheet, so that's why I'm
Okay.
confused.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So then going on to 20, I think it would be really helpful to let us know what is funded under cash for capital.
Yeah, that spreadsheet also.
This is a new line item in the budget. It, from our original budget books, it went up from 756,500 to 1,041,074, but there is no narrative, so we don't know what it's for.
So there's 3 items from the CIP that are proposed funding through cash. Partial paving, the Tarafield modulars, which is.
Wait, partial paving, is that the 110,000?
No, so paving, as you know, there's multiple sources. There's the traditional 200,000, which is an operating transfer, that's the
Public
road
Works
improvements.
Department.
Right. And then we added 103.5 from cash to capital.
Okay. So that's additional cash for capital?
Yep.
Okay.
Then 350,000 for the Tarafield modulars.
350,000 Tarafield.
And then a small partial amount of the central school electrical for 23.
That's 277?
That is 23,000.
Oh, are you sure? I had that as 277. Do I have that wrong?
That doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't. I thought that was supposed to add up to 577. I don't know. Do I have that wrong?
So what numbers are you looking at?
I'm doing this from memory because they aren't written down in this section, so it's a little hard to tell.
But we're on FY 22, 23 operating transfers and cash for capital expenditure projects.
Right.
Yes, you have, capital reserve, so 23,000, you're right, from
From the general
central
fund,
school.
and then the remaining is from capital
Cash-
reserve.
Capital reserves, okay, so that's 23,000.
Yes.
So far, that's about 475,000.
Yeah.
Where's the other 500 plus?
Yep, so the remaining 564,574, that's the additional cash that we built in anticipation of the, thank you, for the debt service increase for next year.
So what is that? What is that total, the extra cash? So it's 656,000 being spent on capital projects in this line item?
476,500 for capital, and then 564,574 to get to the flat mill rate.
Okay, so you lost me, can you go slow? Can you add the capital number for, again, repeat that?
476,500 is the capital number.
And then the extra?
And then it's 564,574.
And that's just cash that's going to sit there.
Yeah, we could put in capital reserve, but it's also cash that we can assign for pension payment. It's cash we can prepay some of our debt. We are bonding some stuff, so we can choose to pay cash for some of our debt. If we aren't sure what we can do, we can put it in capital reserve and assign it for debt service in the following year. So those are some of the policy considerations that I asked Maria to sort of give us some guidance and suggestions on for April 6th, because that's one of the decision points we're gonna have is what to do with that 564,000.
And that 564 would be in addition to what's already in the cash for capital fund. So what would the total be in the cash for capital fund?
We're at about 2,100,000, or I can't even remember at this
I
point.
think it was like 2.1, so we would be about 2.6.
That could go towards Latimer. This number right here that we're seeing cash for capital is one of the ways we're dealing with the spike. So take care of current needs, make hay with it while the sun is shining. And it will give us the opportunity to use this money as a tool while keeping taxes flat. But this is something, if we could get recommendations from staff for the December 5th meeting on how best to utilize that money. So there are a couple of things we're doing in this budget to keep taxes flat. Some, we're using some capacity, but we're also using capital reserves. So can you speak to what capital reserves we're using and whether the total amount of capital reserves we're using?
Yeah, some of them are kind of partial projects, but I was just gonna use the total that's the CNR. Okay. So in the CNR, and this is the bottom of the 6-year CNR plan, which is tab 26. It has the funding sources for all the CNR projects, and the capital reserve fund line shows 290,512. So that's on the CNR, and then on the CIP, tab 27, there's the same breakdown at the bottom of the 6-year plan, and that amount is 577,000.
And then there's also in CNR additional cash, which is not part of the cash for capital.
We show it as general fund, so if you look at the funding sources, there's just a line for general fund, so that has operating transfers and then just cash included in it.
So where is that? Is that in the CNR operating transfers? I don't, where is that? Is that CNR 2022?
I'm not sure what you're looking at, but if you look at the 6-year plan and just go to the bottom where it says funding, and it just lists out all the funding sources for the projects. General fund is the first one.
So we've got CIP, which is cash for capital, the new line item. We've got additional cash, which I think is in CNR 2022. I'm in tab 20.
Yeah. I'm in tab 20.
Yep.
Is that the 405,250 with an additional 340,042? What I'm trying to get at is what are we taxing people for in this budget? We have something called additional cash, cash to capital. In tab 26 is 322,000 for additional cash. Over here, we've got CNR 2022, it's showing 340,000 in additional cash. I'm assuming that's the difference, but I could be wrong.
So it's $310,000 for the additional CNR cash, it's $416,250 for our standard payback, and then the rest of it is included in our standard operating for road improvements, police vehicles that have already been included in the public works budgets, the police budgets.
So what is the 405,250? I'm in tab 20.
It's the CNR 2022.
That was the town managers. If you look on the screen, the updated is here. So we broke it down between the CNR payback, which is the $416,250, and then additional CNR cash of $310,000. That should have been our replacement page.
It switched to 310. Okay, that's where I was missing it.
Yeah, ask you to sort of pull back a little because I'm a lot of these documents were provided to us yesterday. It's hard to pull into to get into the individual line items, but as I understand the cash for capital concept, as I heard you explain it at the Board of Selectmen meeting, right, what we're doing is we've got some unexpected funds this year, and rather than not spend them, or rather than hold on to them or use them for goodies like a tax decrease, what we want to do is apply them to expenses that we have already incurred or budgeted for in future years, and ideally do that in a way that would reduce the overall cost, in not just smooth the increases or the year-to-year differences, but actually save us money in the long run. And so we've got $1.4 million budgeted in cash for capital this year. That makes sense. What I haven't grasped is exactly what future expenses we're going to apply it to so that we know we're actually saving money. And I'll say, Amy, when we spoke at the Board of Selectmen meeting, you ran through some numbers in terms of how much individual households would be taxed in each of the 2 years, and taxpayers would save money based on this approach. But I don't have any assurance from what we've seen so far as to where the money's going to produce that outcome.
Sure. So part of the money, so when I did the analysis with the taxpayer impact, so that was prior to the Board of Selectmen making their changes. So those numbers would be a little different. But in essence, they had $1 million in cash for capital that they wanted to use because it's better to pay cash than it is to bond. It saves for future expenditures, things of that nature. So we had them increase $800,000 to get to a flat mill rate. So part of that they allocated to capital projects. Part of it they used for service improvements, so we do not get the same benefit. The remaining is, I'll show you up here, is this flat mill rate funding of $564,574. So this is without a home. We're basically saying to get to a flat mill rate, we're going to have this $564,000 that essentially should be used for one-time expenditures because we want to reallocate it in the next year. So this year we'll use it for one-time capital, say, and then next year we're basically going to have that money with no purpose, and it gets reallocated to the operating, so that you're not taxing for that $500,000. We're already ahead of next year. That $564,000 was not allocated by the Board of Selectmen, and that's what Lisa has asked us to provide some uses for the April 6th, April 5th meeting.
I started that.
I know you started. So honestly, so that 564 is up to the Board of Finance and how they want to see that impact down the road.
Okay, so just in summary, in terms of cash, we've got CNR additional cash for 310.
Yes.
Right? Then we've got capital reserve fund, which is money we've taxed for in the past that we're using for 290 in CNR. We're using 577 of cash in the CIP, right? And then what are we using for capital reserve in the CIP? How much capital reserve?
That's the 577.
Oh, that's 577. So what are we using general fund cash for in the CIP?
476.
Ah, that's the 476, okay. And that's all the cash we're using?
Right.
Plus the extra 564, 574, okay. And so then next year, we could zero all that out, and that will help be a ballast for taxes. Okay. All right.
So I just want to follow up with one question, because the 574, you said you would put into the operating budget next year as opposed to using it for capital? Because then that creates a cliff in the following year.
No, because we already have it, so it's already part of our grant list. So we're gonna get that money no matter what. So if we have, say, that $1 million in cash for capital, like Lisa was trying to say, is that $1 million, it's already in our grant list, we're already getting it next year. There is no cliff, like that's our money. So anything that's in here, we can zero out the $1 million and say, apply it to the public safety budget next year. So we're not taxing for that million, because we're already taxing for it this year by keeping a flat mill rate.
So basically what it does is it lowers the increase next year. So it's
I
a
get the
cut,
concept,
yeah.
but I thought you were going to apply it somehow to debt service as opposed to.
So that would be one of the options, because we're having a spike, so, you know,
Right.
debt service doesn't stay up forever. It stays up for a few
Right.
years and then it comes down, so we could.
Whereas the operating budget, if you apply it to the operating budget,
Right.
you have that money to apply next year, but the year after you don't. So doesn't that create a cliff the following year?
Yeah, I mean, for the debt service, I mean, that's why we would put it towards debt service.
Right, because you've got a
likely,
spike there.
Or pension or capital reserve for a one-time, or cutting a one-time expense and
Yeah.
then using the savings for a future one-time expense. So
That
those
make
are some
sense
of
to
the
you, Amy?
options.
No, it's already our money. It's just offsetting
it's-
next year's.
Right, but
There's
if-
no cliff. We're not creating a cliff by doing this.
Because it's for a one-time expense.
Right, as long as it's used for a one-time expense
Okay.
in '23,
Agreed.
going forward,
Yes,
there's no
I thought you
cliff.
said you were going to apply it to the usual operating budget next year.
We could, it's just a reallocation.
Okay, we're lost in semantics, but that's okay.
But you're not, it's going for debt service, is that the
Well,
point?
one of the options, we
Is
could
debt-
use it for debt service.
I'm fine with, you know,
Right.
using it to pay the town manager's budget for next year would not be fine with me, because then the following year, you don't have 574 anymore, because you've used it, and then all of a sudden you have that as a, like, new expense in your operating, but it's okay.
You guys are
It's
kind of
getting
saying
late.
the same thing. So,
I think we're just lost in semantics.
yeah.
It is.
No, I don't agree. It's not for one time, it's our money. We're taxing for it. So we tax for it this year, next year we tax for it. Like, it's the same thing as the town manager's budget. We tax for it this year, we tax for it next year, we tax for it the year after. So if the town manager's budget was in fiscal year '23, we're taxing for it, we're getting our money for it. And fiscal year '24, we already have that money from tax revenue, we're only taxing for the increase. That's the same thing here. We have it in this year, so we're taxing for it this year. As long as it doesn't go up next year, we already have that tax money, so there's no cliff. It doesn't matter where you
Well, I'm
apply it
assuming that
to.
you might use cash for capital for capital also. But I understand your point now. Yeah, it's not a one-time tax revenue, it's built in. We
Except
get
we're-
that tax revenue every year, except it's named cash for capital, so one might assume
Except
someone might try to
next year-
spend it for capital.
Yeah, but next year, we're not going to probably have that as a line item. That line item is going to disappear. And so that means the tax increase will be less because
Right.
we've cut the budget by $1 million. So I think you guys were saying the same thing. All right. So we've got that clarified. Moving on. Debt service expenditure, I think we're pretty caught up on what that means and how scary it is. Okay, now going on to water pollution control. This is a fee-generated.
Which tab are you on?
I'm sorry, I'm on 22. This is funded entirely by fees, and it has a separate board, water pollution control. It actually has more control over this budget than most appointed boards. And so I don't know if you want to speak to WPCA at all.
Well, it's funny, I just got a call from Tony, and I think he would just be happy with me saying, like, everybody wants to hear that there's no rate increase this year. The fund reserves are doing fine,
And it's funded entirely by fees.
entirely by fees. And it's actually a great service to the community in terms of it helps with economic development. It helps to preserve and protect the Farmington River, and they do a lot of work cleaning up everybody else's mess.
Right. We do put this on the budget referendum, and the reason why we do this, we found out, is because the town is legally obligated to pay any deficits in the fund. So we do let the public know that this is out there, but it's being managed very well. So that has not ever happened, and we don't expect it to be a concern. And the same for residential property special revenue funds. The town does rent a number of properties and do get some revenue and have expenditures associated with that, but very small dollar numbers. Any concerns with that fund, Tom?
No, that's been going very well. All 6 units have been rented and providing the service.
Okay, moving on to Culture Parks and Rec, which is tab 24. Does anyone have any questions on tab 24?
I do.
Okay.
The Pollinator Initiative, who is that $7,500 going to be paid to?
Local vendors that we would buy supplies from for that, for shrubs, seed, that kind of thing.
So it's buying stuff that your staff would be planting?
Correct. It could be some signage as well, some educational signage.
And have you worked at all with like the beautification committee or the garden club on this?
Brian, Tom Roy, and Orlando Casiano have been working closely with the Simsbury Pollinator Group.
And the beautification also does pollinator.
They do as well, yes.
Are they coordinating?
I believe the pollinator people are talking to everybody. They're working with everybody in town, so.
And I noticed in CNR, there's a line about Iron Horse Boulevard. Is this part of that line?
Some of the product, right? Yeah, some of the product here would go toward that, yes. Yep.
So that's the median strip?
Yes.
Right.
And for your special revenue, you are budgeting more revenues than you are expenditures by about 80,000?
Yeah, that's a projection based on the last couple of years of the golf course. It's like, you know, like we talked before, there's some risk there that will stay the same, and we will. I mean, it's all based on weather conditions, but a lot of that, as you know, a lot of that revenue from in the revenue funds coming from the million to the golf course is typically bringing in.
And so we budget a little bit more revenue to build up reserves.
I'm hoping that's the case, yeah.
Yeah, so GFOA, it's interesting how much reserves should you have, reserves upon reserves upon reserves. And GFOA says for these types of organizations, 45 days, so about 12.5%. So we're about 14%, projecting 17. So one of the questions I had with Maria is not necessarily to cut that, but do we fund that with current taxes or past taxes? And we could fund some of that 30,000 with capital reserve, because we've already taxed and saved for it. This one would be a new tax and give it to you, so why not use a tax that we already have? So that's one thing we'll be thinking about and ask Maria to give some thought to. As we evaluate that, it would not be a cut, but it might be an accounting shift. Any other questions on Cultural Parks and Rec?
Wasn't there a question, well, we just asked it, the 30,000 increase?
Yeah, that's what I was asking about. Okay, moving on to tab 25. This is Linda's tab.
It is?
It is, it's the health, yes, health insurance fund.
So I wanted to ask a little explanation for everybody about how your reserves in the health insurance fund would drop from 26% to, from over 40% to 26%, as was noted in Maria's summary. If you could just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So in the town budget, in the Board of Education budget, since we have so many reserves in the health insurance fund, we're keeping that flat. So if we're keeping that flat, there's actually an increase associated with the insurance. The insurance increase is not flat. We're just utilizing reserves to cover that increase. So you'll see under the fiscal year 23 proposed, under the net change in fund balance, we're actually using 1.3 million of those reserves in order to achieve that reduction in the reserve.
And where is that use of 1 million, where did we see that on this page, the use of that?
Net change in fund balance?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm not seeing that.
The fiscal year 23 proposed, it's right under.
Got it. That's use of reserves. Will that create a cliff for next year?
It could.
Can you explain how that would work?
So we'd either have to increase our operating, or if we are in a good position in fiscal year 23, we might be able to do a feather in. It kind of all depends on our claims experience.
Can you talk about the magnitude of that cliff? What are we thinking about?
Honestly, no. I mean, we only have the projections for fiscal year 23, so I mean, if claims spike post-pandemic, then we could be looking at more than the 1.3. If claims remain consistent, it's the 1.3, and if we have a good year, we could have a benefit from that and reduce the amount of the spike because it would add to our revenues. Another thing that happens at year end is we adjust our IBNR. So if there's less incurred but not reported, that will decrease as well, and that'll help us out. So honestly, I don't have a good gauge as to where we're going to land with the cliff.
So a couple of things that are striking me. As we think about next year, it's going to be a hard year with debt service, so we might have an increase in the capital health savings plan. We might have an increase in pensions once we get the result of the experience study. So is this advisable to take this much out of reserves this year? And should we decrease the amount that we have in cash for capital to accommodate some of that? And that's sort of a risk evaluation that I am not personally capable of making, so I would ask for Maria's input on that thought.
Yeah, I think I shared at a past Board of Finance meeting, generally if we were somewhere in the range of 25 to 30%, I think that's where our consultants are comfortable as well for the reserve. And again, sort of a policy decision from this board is, are you comfortable with that range and do you want to get there this year? So we, I think, did our best to take a look at, again, the board met and Amy worked through that and ours, and if we remained flat, that got us down into that 25 to 30% range that I think we were all looking to get down to a bit. In terms of, if you wanted to keep that amount higher for the upcoming year, that's something we could look at, but.
Personally, I think we should drop it back down.
But even if it creates a spike the following year?
There's just too much money sitting in there. And it's going to sit there forever if you're worried about the cliff problem.
So I think Maria said it really well. So we got it down to about the 25%. But just remember, even if we have a rough year or we have to feather in, we still have that 25%.
Yeah.
And we can still utilize that to offset and rebuild our fund balance if we wanted to. So it, like Maria said, it really is a policy decision on where your comfort level is with those reserves.
Right now, our current policy is to keep this reserve 20 to 25%. We have not actually voted to increase it, so we would still have a cushion there.
Right.
All right, so this is a risk you are comfortable taking.
Again, yeah, I think it's reasonable. Again, that 25 to 30% range I think is reasonable in terms of what we want to make sure that we keep in the reserve for the health insurance fund to keep it solvent, to keep it healthy.
So is volatility in this the norm?
Yes, because we're self-funded.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, we've been self-funded since the 80s, right, when the insurance companies walked away. So we have a ton of historical data
That's
or
true.
experience on this fun stuff. So we've got to be able to, or is it, yes, data from 30 years ago is completely, totally, utterly irrelevant because, we're a larger town and we employ more people and we're doing different services, et cetera, et cetera. So my point is, historically, or can we look historically back and say, oh, well, yeah, from time to time it does go up and down, or no, it's just random, completely, totally, and utterly random
It's
every
not,
year.
well, having a health insurance background, I'll tell you, there is a seasonality to it. Your
Yeah,
claims
I
are
would think
always
so.
higher in the winter than they are in the summer. If you have a major medical problem, somebody gets cancer, heart transplant, whatever, you get little spikes. That's why we have stop-loss insurance.
Right.
But I think if you were to look over it, there's fluctuations
Yeah,
like
but
this.
I would
not-
like to, I would imagine that there would be patterns.
Yeah, for
right,
sure.
in the data, there,
Yeah.
being a geek and a data guy, I would imagine that there'd be patterns in the data, and we'd be able to
Yeah.
kind of get a good feel for.
Yeah.
You know.
That's why I don't really want to see us have 40%. I mean,
Right.
there's no way that that if you were to look back 25 years, you'd see a year where you were 40% higher than normal.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and just in the many years now that I've been managing sort of a self-insured health insurance fund for town and schools, that the trends have changed over time, sometimes in terms of what those cost drivers might be. For example, there were some sort of one-time cost increases with implementation of the Affordable Care Act. Sometimes, as Lynn said, you might just get a year where you get an unusual amount of outliers. They're not preventable illnesses, unusual things. But then again, your stop loss kicks in, but it's really sort of the overall number of those outliers can sometimes just be unusual. A more recent trend that we've been seeing in recent years are specialty medications, which are helping many people and really improving their quality of life, but they're incredibly expensive specialty medications. So that's been an area where we've seen in recent years a major driver in terms of any cost increases that we're seeing. So I would say the reasons and trends have changed over time.
That's it.
So, yeah, 25%. Yeah, a very significant reserve, agreed.
Okay.
That is correct.
Moving on to the next tab, which is tab 26, CNR. Just a quick summary of how we do capital non-recurring. So we have a traditional payback, which is the project's different every year, but the amount is the same, and that's $416,000, right? Then we have this new additional cash, which is a new tax for $310,000. Then we have use of capital reserves, $290,000, 510. Then we have capital that's in the base budget, and there are 3 new additions to the base budget. We've got 10,000 public radio system maintenance repairs being added as part of a regular base capital addition. The 3 police cruisers at 155, 453. We've got the police administrative vehicle at 48,300. Those are base that have to be replaced every year. We've got the public works plow truck, which has increased quite a bit in cost to 210. We've got a new base capital, which is 25,000 in materials recycling. And we have a new base capital at 5,000 for community maintenance repairs. So Maria, do you want to speak to the new additions to the base capital?
Sure, and just one slight correction, the materials recycling, that already was in the budget, but that does reflect an increase. So we typically do that about every 3 years, plus or minus. And the most recent time when we actually went out this past year to do that work, we would really need to budget about $25,000 a year to cover the cost of that expense when we do go out to do that. So that was just an increase. The community farm maintenance and repairs, this came out of the facilities master plan, and I think Tom and I are getting a much better handle on some of the needs. So we do own what was formerly called the community farm. It's the farm that's currently being leased by Gifts of Love, but we do own the infrastructure, and we do have some obligations there for maintenance and repairs of the farmhouse, again, some of the barn structures, etc. And we think that having that small amount going into the CNR on a regular basis, it's a farm, so a lot does go wrong, and we also, through the master plan, learned that we have a lot of needs there, but smaller needs, good needs. The public safety radio system, I'll let Melissa speak to that.
Sure, and we did have that programmed in the CNR last year as well, so that's.
The which one?
The public safety radio system.
Oh,
maintenance
I
and
missed that
repairs.
one.
Yeah, so that is for our new radio system, which we just finished the implementation of that project. You'll recall that was a large capital project from a couple of years ago. That is a shared system. We do make use of shared infrastructure with the fire district because they already had a radio system. So after our analysis, we determined that that was the best path to go with. So we do have in the police department operating budget the funds for the ongoing maintenance of that system. But this line here is for any maintenance or repairs to the shared infrastructure that we have with the fire district. So we have an MOU with the fire district that we collaborate with them by January 15th of each year. They'll let us know what's coming up on the shared infrastructure, and according to the MOU, we've split those costs 50/50.
And then for Town Aid Road, it looks like we're spending more this year between capital non-recurring and the CIP than we bring in revenue. Can you speak to that, and also what the balances in Town Aid Road?
Road, we bring in about just under $375,000 a year. But for Town Aid Road, I don't believe for CNR we're using the full 375. If you're looking at the summary page, it's Town Aid Road. We've got a lot of miscellaneous revenue sources, so we try to show in that category Town Aid Road, the 12 fund, grants, donations. 191.5, thanks, Melissa, but 191.5 is coming from Town Aid Road to go towards equipment, and then we also use a portion of Town Aid Road to pay for paving, which is under capital.
So I had 281,500 in CNR, is that wrong?
For Town Aid Road,
I had Melissa verify that, so.
Well, if you go to the funding source page at the bottom of the 6-year capital plan, that's where it lists, again, all the funding sources. So Town Aid Road is 191.5 there.
I am looking at that and seeing Town Aid Road Golf Grant Fund and Donation for
Yeah, not that
$350.
page, the actual 6-year plan. The actual 6-year plan spells out all the funding sources at the bottom.
Digitally, it's page 141.
I don't have that.
Do you guys have page numbers?
Nope.
So why wouldn't they be the same on both documents?
Because that document, as Maria said, includes several other funding sources, the breakdown one.
Yeah, we just sort of, visually, we're running out of room for columns for some of those smaller miscellaneous sources of revenue on that summary page. But if you are looking at that summary page, the Town Aid Road items, it's the 1-ton dump truck for crew leader. It is the 1-ton roller. It's the milling machine for skid steer, the Bobcat track skid loader, and the 11-inch snowplow. And that's 191.5.
Okay, and how much are we spending out of Town Aid Road in the CIP, Capital Improvement Plan?
That is 140,000.
And what is the balance in Town Aid Road?
We've been trying to keep at least a minimum of 1 year's amount of funding, preferably upwards of about 500,000. But we can get that number for you because we've been tracking that.
And what is the thinking in keeping a year's of funding in there?
We can talk about that.
Okay.
What?
I don't know. Why would we keep a reserve for a recurring reliable grant?
Well, for actually some period of time, and the not too distant past, Town Aid Road was in jeopardy several times of not being funded, and/or Town Aid Road Fund would be in the governor's proposed budget, but then in risk of not being released. And so I think the thought had been is that, just in the off chance that it's not funded, that the funds aren't actually released, because it's been close at times, that to maintain 1 year funding in the event that that does happen, mid-year, the funds don't come, that we have funds to cover
The other thing is there are some years where we have big equipment purchases, and we try not to have multiple big purchases in the same year. Things like when we buy a sweeper, it's $250,000. When we buy a front-end loader, it's $200,000. So we try to make sure those aren't on the same years, but sometimes that's when the cycle falls. So there could be years where there's a little bit bigger hit.
So you've heard me say this before, I'm just not a fan of us having multiple emergency funds. We have reserves, millions of dollars of reserves for instances where there's an aberration in what happens. And the risk, honestly, of Town Aid Road not being funded, given that every representative in the legislature has a town or more than one town that they represent, is minuscule. So I wouldn't necessarily be, feeling like you need to keep a year worth of reserves in a special reserve. We've already got reserves, and it just seems duplicative to me.
If you're doing it to save up for future large equipment, that can make sense, but not as reserve for fear of losing the money, because we can handle that if you do.
Yeah, so I think, again, it is looking ahead at some of the years where there's some bigger purchases. And even this year, we look at like the plow truck, which had been reliably at about 180,000, and the number went way north of that this year. There are some changes, and we're hoping that this current situation with the cost of some of our large equipment in our vehicles goes down, but we're certainly planning a little bit for some bigger purchases coming up.
Yeah, clearly, because down the road, next year, it's 191 for 22-23, and it's 482 for 23-24, and 519 for 24-25.
Right.
So also too, just like Maria was saying, we've been tracking it, so we do like a generic, 492,000 is the balance at the end of the fiscal year 23. And then 24, we put in some placeholders. So just like Tom was saying, next year is likely going to be a larger year. The year after that, larger, but obviously we'll have to make some adjustments because we'll have a negative fund balance.
So if that's what's happening, then I agree. If it's, if you're pre-funding, kind of saving up for a large purchase and then it zeroes out, but I'm just not comfortable with the idea of leaving $500,000 in there just in case TAR isn't funded. That was my
A few
concern.
years ago when there was some talk about it, we had built it up more, but it's way down from that, and it's more just to come up with these different variations in year over year.
So if we could go on to, are we ready to move on to bonded capital?
Oh, yeah, I am.
I'm ready for
Can we,
dinner.
I know. Do we need a break? Do you need a break?
No, I need to go home and eat.
Well, you can't go to
I don't want a break.
I
mean, aren't we going to meet tomorrow? So can we just talk about process? What is the plan here?
So we are coming tomorrow to talk about budget. If people are reaching the end of their limits, we can talk about, can we just get through the capital and then,
okay.
all right.
If I know what the end point is, I'll hold on. I'm not going to be here till midnight.
All right, so we will get through capital, and it looks like we won't finish this through tomorrow, but can you talk about what we're bonding, how much we're bonding for? Golf course irrigation is our largest for $2,550,000. Is that high enough to go to referendum?
Where are you, tab?
I don't know.
Tab
27.
27.
Is that a referendum question?
A separate question. Does that reach to 2%? That might be close.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, just barely, but yes.
Okay. So we will have one referendum question, and then we're bonding, I'll read off what I think we're doing, and you let me know if I have it wrong. I think we're doing highway pavement management for $605,000. Town hall site and safety improvements for $450,000. Parking lots for $245,000. District Board of Ed, district network infrastructure for $400,000. District climate control improvements for $450,000. Tooten Hills water distribution and drainage for $480,000. Central School replace EPDM roof V3 for $314,000. And Tarafield roof replacement for $850,000 for a total of $6,344,000 being bonded. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Ah.
But the total bond is, again, on the funding
section at the bottom of the 6-year plan. So that'll have your total bonded amount.
It has the total number, but you couldn't tell what it's being bonded for because there's partial, like, highway is a partial, the total cost is 1,200, but you're only bonding 605, so it's very hard to tell what the summary is. Could we get a summary page for tomorrow night on what we're bonding for and how much?
It is in the capital project detail sheets in your
It
book.
is.
But yeah, I'm sure we could come up with some way in the spreadsheet to try and itemize that for you.
It has to, I think we have to summarize that for the public hearing notice in any event, so it's work that needs to be done. Or we've done that in the past, I assume we're doing that again. One of the choices we have for the additional 500,000 is to pay cash for some of these bonded capitals, so that's one of the things we'll be talking about. And then let me see if we can get to the other capital projects are being funded. You talked about we're using cash for some of the capital projects, right? 577 for capital reserves. Grants, we're utilizing about 1.7 million. ARPA, 2.130 million, is that about right?
Sorry, yeah, it's 2,130,000.
Then we're using cash that we're taxing for 476,500, is that right, Melissa?
Yes, that's correct.
We're using 156,500 from LoSiP. And the total capital project plan is 12,522,744. Okay. So that's a big number, and really the only thing we're taxing for it in the current year is 476,500. The out years will be taxed through bonding. Is that right? We've got bonds, grants, capital reserves, ARPA, LoSiP, TAR, trust, special revenue, sewer usage, transfer from operating, and then cash for capital. So 12 million. Did folks have questions on the capital projects as presented? Bert?
Maybe tomorrow.
Maybe tomorrow. All right, are we done? I think we're fading fast. Okay, just for the members of the public, we got a lot of information. We got our packets Friday afternoon, and then we got a lot of the information either yesterday and some just tonight. So to the extent people are wondering why don't we have a good handle on this, it's because we are just looking at some of this right now for the first time, so we do appreciate the patience as we go through it and try to evaluate it. We did have the opportunity to review a lot of this online and appreciate folks for posting it online. Are there any other questions for tonight or that we need for tomorrow?
Feel free to ask at the risk of having your head chopped off.
What about the dog, though?
One of the things I did request, because our board members have asked, is for a summary of what it is we'll be approving and moving to public hearing. Like, what is the Board of Selectmen's budget? What is the Board of Ed's? What is everything that is generally in the notice that we put out? If there could just be some summary document so we understand what we're approving would be helpful to review before we actually cast the vote. All right.
I move to adjourn.
Okay.
I second it.
All right, we're done. Thank you, everyone.